Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, whatever time it happens to be for you. This is Aaron Wissner of Local Future. It is July the 13th, 2020. It's a Monday here in the USA, and we are getting ready to start a call with Nicole Foss of Australia. We have what I would call kind of an ongoing show every Monday. Well, Tuesday if you're on the other side of the date line. And so what we'll be talking today is partially up to you, partially up to us. I haven't really looked at the news in a couple of weeks, so I'm very curious to see what the news is like, what's going on. I mean, I do know that today we got an alert from our governor in Michigan that it was time to put the masks back on, both indoors and outdoors. And that was an alert that came up on the phone on its own. So an emergency alert. And so I think that quite a bit's happened in the last couple of weeks. I'm curious to see what Nicole has seen versus what I have seen. And yeah, so I think we'll talk about some different little things. I'm just getting everything configured here. Looks like, hey, there's somebody on a viewer. I don't know if that's actually a real viewer or if that's just a figment of YouTube's imagination. So if you are a viewer and you want to say hi, that's great. Nicole said she'd be here in about 10 minutes, but that was like 5 minutes ago. So she'll be here in about 5 minutes. If you have questions or things that you would like us to discuss, that would be great. If you'd like to, on the YouTube, add in the information, your information, that would be very cool. And I'm going to keep an eye over there on the YouTube to see who is talking or chatting. Of course, most people are going to be viewing this later on. So before I say too much, I should point out that the YouTube channel for Local Future has all sorts of interesting stuff. And let me bring that up for you. So if I go to YouTube and then do a little screen sharing here, and I'm going to go to the Local Future channel first. So this is the Local Future YouTube channel, and when you click on it, you will see that there is, well, I'm live now, obviously. And if you go to videos, this has our most recent videos that we've broadcast. And so for the past 3 months or so, I've been basically doing these kind of talk style shows. They're uncut, unedited, raw, so to speak. And typically we have all the cameras on at the same time, so you can see reactions and everything. So it's very conversational, I would have to say. And so you can see the one that we did last week, actually 2 weeks ago, was with Daryl Taylor of Australia, along with Nicole Foss from New Zealand, and myself from the United States, Michigan. And we talked about fire, which was kind of an interesting topic because fire, burning stuff, is of course one of the major contributors, if not the one contributor to climate change. And so that shows kind of an interesting one, and it's a little bit longer, but as always on YouTube, you can switch the speed to 1.5, 1.75, 2.0, and that can be really helpful in keeping the conversation down to a reasonable length of time. Now, what today we might do is break this show into several pieces. And one of the topics I thought that would be fun to talk about was taxes. Because in the United States, taxes are due this week. It was delayed 3 months, but household taxes are due. And I spent part of the day today attempting to work on that, trying to find the numbers and papers to put in there. And it just there's a lot to say about taxes. So if we take more of a look at the website here, I'll pull that up a bit there. So we also talked about I had a nice chat with Robert Rapier, a very intelligent energy analyst. We talked about investing money, trying to make money grow by some percentage rate each year. So that was a really good conversation. And again, at 2 times speed, it's only 35 minutes, so that's quite nice. Prior to that, on the 22nd of June, we talked with Nicole about organized corruption. And I got a little feedback on that because I hadn't talked about the Clintons. And we did talk about the Clintons a little bit, but I didn't list them in the description that we talked about the Clintons. So that's something to know. And then let's see, systemic shocks, electromagnetic pulses. So David Korowicz and I talked about this a few weeks ago, and I did a news roundup. And then this one I really enjoyed. Not a lot of people have watched this, though. You can see only 57. The inner lives of animals. And so people are probably wondering, hey, that doesn't really look like it fits. And so the inner lives of animals, that one was about, do animals have souls? Do they have consciousness? What do they have exactly? Do they have an intelligence similar to our own? What if they are, for example, have larger brains or smaller brains? What if they're a dolphin or a whale or another great ape like a bonobo or an orangutan or a dog or a cat or a cow or a pig or whatever? So that was kind of interesting. Oh, you got to see me look at my email for a second. Sorry about that. This one I haven't published because the audio quality is really so good. And I was kind of in a mood that day, but it's how money is destroying Uganda and Africa and the third world or developing world in general. I don't think it's a bad video. I just hadn't published it yet. But I mean, if you put it in the comments that you want to see it, you're welcome to watch it and then let me know. I think I kind of had a sarcastic attitude, so that I didn't really feel comfortable publishing that one. But that follows on after a couple of these where I had talked to people who are interested in helping Africa. Aisha is actually in Africa. In fact, she is today in her hometown. She left the large city to go to her hometown. I think there was a death in the family. And then this one was really interesting as well with Vincent Lin. He's been in Africa and the Middle East quite a bit trying to help out there. And that's actually really interesting. And again, at 2 times speed, you can really speed it up there. This one's actually had quite a few views. Something kind of funny about this YouTube channel is that you'll see the number of views there, and the number of views is not really reflective of how many people watch the whole thing. So depending on the length, if it's short, if it's less than 20 minutes, you probably have 50%. If it's well titled, if people can read the title and say, okay, yeah, I think I know what this is going to be about, then they might watch the whole thing, maybe 50%, 30%, somewhere in there. I could kind of show you if you're curious. But then the longer ones, like with Daryl, Embracing Fire Inside and Out, that title is, it's hard to come up with a title that was really going to be descriptive because we talked about Australia and wildfires there and trying to build a house after wildfire, preparing for wildfire, governments and responses. We talked about California and the fires there, climate change and how that tends to more fires. We talked about a lot of stuff like that. So I saw a little glitch there. So I'm wondering if Nicole's trying to come in. Nicole, are you there? She's not there. I can see I've only got one participant, but as far as one of me on the call itself, I've got somebody also on the line watching, a couple people watching. Hello, watching people. I don't know if you're watching live or not. Hopefully you're watching live because I'm kind of just mumbling on. Yeah, and so some of these I really like this one with DiAnna Ritola, I thought was really good. She's a licensed counselor or pastor, minister. And this one over here on human nature, who am I, why do I get angry? I thought that one was really interesting too, kind of a good entry level one. This one here, I put a RPA on, a red pill alert, because I found this one disturbing, where Steve Keen and Nicole Foss and I were talking about how via the use of money and laws, that stuff is accumulated into the first world from the third world, and how the global economy is kind of a wealth pump. And that's actually very similar to what Richard Heinberg said a few days later in this video here. So, but there are a lot of videos, and I've talked to a lot of different people. I published some stuff that had not been published before. Let's take a look and see what people are watching, because they can kind of give you recommendations, right, based on what people are watching. And let's see, analytics. We'll just go to the last 90 days and see what people are watching the most. So if you become a YouTuber, you get all this stuff as well, all these like interesting statistics. So yeah, this one, what if I can't pay my mortgage, with Steve Keen, that's had the most views in the last 90 days. I'm not sure why this one has had so many. Probabilities and possibilities of the future with Nicole Foss, the deep shock, but over 1,000. The big unraveling with Nicole Foss. Daniel Quinn, this is an interview. He's one of my favorite authors, and I had invited him several times to come to Michigan to participate in a conference as the keynote speaker, but he very politely declined several years in a row. And eventually I said, well, would it be possible for me to come to Houston and to interview you? And then I could record it and take it back and show it to the audience, and you'd still be like participating, and we can have a phone call at the end. And so we actually did that, and I think this is the same video I used. I actually recorded about 7 hours of video, 6 or 7 hours. 2 of them are published online, and the rest really aren't. Permaculture with Peter Bane, that's a very good talk. It's not all that long either. I think it's 40 minutes or something like that. This one, will the financial system collapse, with Gail Tverberg. Gail, the actuary, she used to be part of the Oil Drum as an editor. That is very, very, very good. The first hour, we're kind of establishing credentials for her. Like I'm just talking about, well, what is an actuary? What do actuaries figure out? How does it relate to the insurance industry? How does it relate to finance? So yeah, that's really good. I would recommend that to anybody. And then of course there's older stuff. Like if I go back to Lifetime, the stuff that's had the most views, this one about how do banks create money is one of the more popular ones, this Pico L1, which it's 10 minutes long, and I spent like 100 hours working on it. I don't know if it was 100 hours, but it was a lot of time. I mean, it's highly edited. So if you want to take a look at that, it was from 2006, so 14 years ago. But I was trying to, at that time, YouTube videos could only be 10 minutes long. And this was back when people were just getting video editing on the computer. And so, hey, there's Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Hello. Sorry, it took me a few minutes.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Can you turn your camera on?
Oh, sorry. Let's see. Why is it not showing me the normal screen for this? For some reason, it's not. Hang on, I'm just trying to get it to. That's better. Then it gives me the camera controls. There we are.
Hi.
That work? Hello.
How are you doing?
Not too bad.
We are broadcasting live and recording. Is that okay?
That is absolutely fine.
Okay, good. I was just summarizing and for anybody who might be watching, and the part prior to this can always be trimmed away, as you know, later. But I was just talking about the Local Future YouTube channel and some of the videos we've done and some of the other videos on there. So let's see, I think there are a couple people watching. Yeah, there's 3 people watching.
I've invited Stephanie Rearick to do one of these with us. So I haven't heard back yet.
Yes,
but
well,
hopefully I will. So for people who don't know who Stephanie is, she runs a Mutual Aide Network in Madison, Wisconsin. And she is awesome. It's all about connecting people at the grassroots level to achieve wonderful things. You will like Stephanie a lot.
Okay, and I should put a little comment in for, let's see, we're at the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to type in, let's see, Nicole joins at 15 minutes. Uh-oh, I think I refreshed. See if I can go back to the live view. Okay, Nicole joins at 15 minutes. There we go. And we have a question already from Addicted. Addicted to Oil Australia. I like it. I like that title or the name, the handle. Very nice.
There are a lot of oil-aware people in Australia.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. There's so much happening down there.
Yeah, Australia's so, you know, I don't know if it's for you Australians, I don't know if it's because of Mad Max and the Road Warrior or what it is, but you guys are tuned in to that sort of stuff much more than people in the US are, I have to say.
I have a theory about that, which is that if you grow up in a place where limits are everywhere, then you learn to respect limits. And when somebody tells you there are other limits out there that you need to be aware of, they're like, I'm listening, tell me all about it. Because the thing with Australia, although it's huge, it has floods, it has droughts, it has wildfires, it has soil about this thick. You know, you have to be so careful. Australians all know exactly how many millimeters of rainfall falls in their area. You know, anywhere I've ever lived, nobody cares. They just want it to stop. Like, because I've lived in places that are really quite wet. Australia is really arid. The limits people face there all the time, and things can come out and hit you in an instant, like what happened to Daryl. We were talking about in the last week's conversation. They got about 30 seconds notice and their town burned down. So when you grow up in a place where there are limits, you understand limits intuitively. People who live on islands do too, because, well, there's the land and there's the sea and there's an edge and you can see that there are limits in your world. Whereas if you grew up in the middle of the Great Plains and you could drive for hours and hours and things really wouldn't change very much and things are pretty much the same for very large distances, it's easy to see how people could think, well, there aren't any limits. There are no limits in my world. You know, no borders, no changes. Everything is pretty much the same. And so I think to some extent, geography is destiny in terms of how people see the world. I think that's partly why people in Cascadia see the world so differently, because if you're sandwiched between the mountains and the sea, there's a strip of land there, but it's very heavily populated.
And Cascadia, for anybody that's not familiar with the term Cascadia, that's basically the United States on the Pacific Ocean. So that'd be California, Oregon, Washington, even up into Canada.
British Columbia.
Yeah, British Columbia.
Yeah, I wouldn't include Southern California in that. It seems to be British Columbia down to about San Francisco. That seems to work with that kind of mentality.
I can go with that. I was going to, speaking of islands, so I don't know if you're familiar with this one, but I'm going to switch to Google Earth for just a second. And I know this is supposed to be kind of a podcast, but I'll just talk about what I'm showing here. So
Vancouver.
At the moment, this actually I am, but the reason I have it on this is because how long did you live in Canada, Nicole?
Oh, well, I moved there in 1970. And I was there until 1989. And then I went.
How old were you in 1970?
Well, when I moved there, I was 4.
Okay. Gotcha.
Although I was 5 not long after that. So
okay.
I was born in 65, the end of 65, moved to Canada in 1970, moved back to England in 1989, stayed there until 2000, went back to Canada, stayed in Canada again until 2014, then moved to New Zealand. So I've been around a lot.
So one of the things I've been keeping an eye on is this opening of the borders. So this might be something we can talk about. And with Canada here and Washington, the border between Canada and Washington. So apparently they have a zero avenue here in, I don't know what this town is here, Surrey or Langley City. What is that? Vancouver. So kind of
Well,
south
it's
of
Vancouver, but Vancouver has lots of little suburbs that have their own sort of separate names.
So if you zoom in all the way to the border, right here. So I'm gonna turn off all the extra stuff on Google.
So somebody's farm actually straddles the border.
Well, yeah, that one surprised me. Like, where is this? Okay, so take a look right here. So here's the border, right? This is Zero Avenue in Canada. And then if you walk across the ditch, you're on this street in the United States. You see how they built those two streets? And there's no wall there or anything. I mean, there is a border post over here, you know, because you got to go through the border post if you've got a car. You know, you can't drive your car across the ditch because the ditch is kind of deep. But there's actually really nothing there. And so there's these married couples or common law couples, and they are trying to, you know, stay connected, but they're split by the border. Like there was one couple who they'd been living together in a camper, like a travel trailer, and they'd been going from campground to campground to campground for like a year and a half. And they went into Canada and they were like, oh, we don't know if we want you to come in here. And then he had to go back for work or something. They wouldn't let her out of the country, or the other way around or something. And so like these couples of two countries are stuck, you know, going between one and the other. But I think this is so funny because there's some couples, they'll come up and they'll talk across the ditch to each other, you know? So I don't know where I read that, but it's so interesting, this geography stuff. And I was going to say one other thing about Tikopia, because I've been thinking about Tikopia a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
You mentioned it before. It was the secret word you used for people to identify that they had sat through the entire thing.
That's right.
But I'm not actually familiar with it beyond that.
Okay, well, this is Tikopia, and Tikopia is this. Let me put it on fancy 3D view. Maybe it'll rotate out. I don't know how you get it to like spin. There's like all these little fun features on Google Earth. But on Tikopia, this island was isolated for like 3,000 years. And this guy, Raymond Firth, was one of the first ones who spent much time there. I mean, there had been, you know, a couple boats, ships that had landed there, but it was just, there's nothing interesting there. And this whole island this is in Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. And
I must read that. I must.
Oh, you should.
I have it, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Oh, it's an easy read because it's like case studies, so it's fun.
Oh, I believe it, and I just have the most unbelievable reading list.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that too. Let me put that on our reading list.
Most of my books are in storage at the moment because where we live now, there isn't room to put them all on bookshelves. So I'm hoping that we can build ourselves a little mini library in whatever tiny home we end up living in the future.
So anyway, Tikopia, if you zoom way in, and I don't know if the viewers will be able to see this real well, but the entire island, everything that can grow food has been divided into really weird little plots. And there's about 1,200 people, almost exactly 1,200 people that live on this island. If you want to have more than 2 kids, you have to leave the island. You have to like go live somewhere else because the chiefs, there's 4 chiefs, and the 4 chiefs have decided that 1,200 is enough. Apparently, after missionaries and Christianity came to this island, they weren't able to do birth control anymore, not the way they had been doing it. And they had several clever ways to do it. And so the population exploded to like 1,800. Well, this little island just doesn't have enough. I mean, even fishing in the lagoon and fishing around the island, it was not a very nice lifestyle to have 1,800 on this island. I don't know if they exceeded the carrying capacity really, or if it was just kind of a lot of work, you know, and they realized, oh my gosh, we got to work land that's really not fun to work. I mean, we've got to work up way on the slopes, and you know, we're getting thin. But eventually, even though they still have this, you know, Christian church there, they've decided that if you're going to have more than 2 kids, you've got to go somewhere else. So, but there was a family that went there in 2013 with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old from Norway. And let me show you this. This is really interesting. So if you go to YouTube and then you go to, and this all ties into sustainability and stuff, right? So it was called Message in a Bottle. And if you type that in, message in a bottle, and then Tikopia, and then you click on the link, and then click on videos. So here's the series. So they went there, they lived on this island. The first season, they lived on the island for 6 months. This couple from Norway with their 2 kids. And then the second series isn't quite as interesting because they try to get back there, but they're on this ship, the Intrepid or something, for most of the time. So it's not quite as interesting. But this is really fascinating because they make it really kid friendly, and they talk about kind of sustainability on this island and how they're living there and everything.
That sounds fascinating.
Oh, it is. And there's some other videos, not a lot, about Tikopia as well. But
I will watch this with my 11-year-old stepdaughter.
Oh, definitely.
She is fascinated with this sort of thing. She will watch anything by David Attenborough. She will watch every documentary we can find for her. She just absorbs knowledge like a sponge, and she would love that.
Well, it was nicely done as well, because the episodes, each one is exactly 12 minutes. It's not like even like 12:05. No, each episode's 12 minutes long, and it has like this little intro and the little outro, and well edited, and the sound quality is good, and the picture quality is good, and the kids are, I mean, it's really focused for anybody to watch. I mean, it doesn't go into, you know, like, oh, how did they maintain their population? Oh, well, they had, you know, they had to do these various things, you know, but I think we're talking about geography, right? So I think that relates.
Yeah, I mean, if you're living on an island that size, the limits are really, really obvious. And also, you have a population that where everyone's going to know each other, and people can deal with things when they know each other personally. And it's easier to have mutual coercion mutually agreed upon in circumstances like that. So mutual coercion mutually agreed upon is the solution that Garrett Hardin proposed to the tragedy of the commons. In other words, we all have to get together and agree to limit our consumption so that all of us will have a share. So this is what you have to do. You know, if you want to have, say, fishing in the North Sea, you have to hand out fishing licenses and quotas and things, because there isn't enough to go around for everyone who would choose to fish there. This is why
Hardin?
Garrett Hardin.
Garrett
Hardin. He wrote the original essay, The Tragedy of the Commons.
Okay.
And he's written quite a few things. I think he's dead now. But the book that I remember of his was called Filters Against Folly. And it was about how different people see the world, how ecologists see the world, how economists see the world, and how you can sort of combine those views. And it was a brilliant book. I read it when it came out in 1985. And I did a book report on it for one of my courses at university. And I would still recommend it. His work is really, really interesting. But if you have too many people, you can't come up with a strategy where you can have mutually agreed coercion mutually applied. So if you have too many people, you're not going to know what everybody's doing, and you're not going to have any control over the resource base to the same extent. Whereas if you have a small group of people and everyone knows each other, you all get together and you say, well, you know, guys, this is what we have. This is what we have to share. This is all we have. How are we going to share it equally? What rules are we going to impose on ourselves that we all have to agree to in order to make this work for everyone? And if you have a small enough group of people, you can absolutely do that. And the chances of finding some kind of consensus that people can live with is pretty high. You try and do that with something the size of the US, it's not going to work because you don't know everyone. You just don't have the personal trust, the personal knowledge. So it's a bit like saying that from each according to his needs, to each, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, which is the definition of communism. That also works really well at very small scale. It doesn't scale up. And we have these problems all the time. When we try to scale up things that work at small scale, things that come from our own evolutionary history, living in tribes and villages and things, when we try to scale up the things that worked at small scale, we find they don't work at large scale because there are too many emergent properties. And this ends up being a real problem for people.
I like this topic, but I also want to honor Addicted to Oil AU.
Oh, sure.
So
Sure.
I'm gonna read the comment from he or she. I'm guessing it's a he because this channel is watched by 85% men. So you're bringing them in, Nicole.
All the peak oil sites are like that. When I was at the oil drum, I think I was one of the only women for quite a long time. There were a few, but not a huge number. And at the time, I didn't even tell them I was female. I didn't tell them I was male. I never told them anything that wasn't true, but I let them believe I was male. And that really helped, I think, in terms of establishing credibility in an all-male audience. And once I already had credibility, then I said, guess what? I'm female. And I'm also 20 years younger than you think I am.
Really?
Yes.
That's
They
nice.
all thought I was some old British guy in his mid-60s. And I was actually female and 42 at the time.
So my dinner has arrived. So we're going to do two things. Number one, I'm going to give you the question, which I put to you in the chat, but I will also read it for everybody. And then I'm going to just switch to Nicole's camera so nobody has to watch me eating my veggie burger. So here's the question. It says, "Hi, Aaron." We didn't even introduce ourselves, did we? We should introduce ourselves. "Hi, I'm Aaron Wissner. I'm in Michigan. And it is, let's see, July the 13th, 2020. It's a Monday here. It's about 7 p.m. And I am the founder and organizer of Local Future, a nonprofit educational organization focusing on the future." And so that goes into this question. And Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
So I'm Nicole Foss. I'm a futurist, sort of crystal ball gazer, if you like, looking at limits to growth. And so what does that look like? What is going to happen? How do we deal with it? What sort of mechanisms can we employ to move forward so that we don't suffer too many consequences for hitting limits to growth? So I've been working in this field for a long time. I live in New Zealand. For me, at the moment, it's Tuesday, the day after it is for Aaron. So we always have these time zone issues. So it's early in the morning for me, but we managed to find a time that works.
So here's the question. And right now we have about 7 people live watching YouTube. So we're broadcasting live. This is unedited, unscripted. We didn't really even.
I never script anything.
Yeah, well, I'm getting that way as well with kids. And so the question is, and if you're on the YouTube right now, please put in questions because I've got stuff, but Nicole and I've talked. I don't know. She's got the tally. 28 hours or something in the past few months.
It's over 30, I think.
30 hours. So if you put some questions.
But some of that included Daryl, who did most of the talking on the episode that we did with him. So
right. Well, so someone pointed
30 hours.
Someone thought it was kind of funny because they said, Daryl was talking about being a good listener. And then, but he talked the whole time. And I was, that's fine. I didn't have any particular plans. And I was interested in what Daryl had to say about fire because I think it's really,
he is actually a very good listener, but there was so much to communicate. Like he has a brain the size of a planet. And so give him a few hours to communicate this vast quantity of knowledge and that's what he does. But you can absolutely have conversations with Daryl where he will spend the vast majority of the time listening. It just depends on the context, whether he feels that he's trying to communicate something or whether his role is to sit back and listen. As a psych nurse, you have to be a good listener.
Is he a psych nurse? I didn't know that.
Yes, he is.
He didn't really do an intro of that. Because this is what I do. I mean, I'm a dad and I do this, and other than that, I'm kind of retired from public school teaching. I mean, I am retired legally and technically and everything, but yeah, we have a little note from the chat that Daryl did speak quite a lot, or to quote, Daryl talked way too much. So well, maybe the next time we have him on the show, though, we can like balance it out.
He talks a lot, but I find everything he says is worth listening to, so I never mind.
Okay, so let's go to Addicted to Oil AU's question. I hope it's Australian and then not Austria. If it is Austria, I apologize. Hi, Aaron. What do you think is leading us towards a local future? Have you seen the HSBC Banks 2017 report, which concludes oil outputs will imminently decline 5 to 8% per year, ? So I'm going to let you address that first while I eat my burger, and I'm going to turn my mic off so nobody has to listen to me chewing.
Okay, I haven't actually seen that specific report, or at least, well, I might have seen it in 2017, but I don't specifically remember. So I would have to look that up. But in terms of the prediction that you mentioned with output declining, I do think output is going to decline, and quite imminently, because when these large fields start to water out, then the decline is rapid. You keep increasing output until all of a sudden you can't anymore, and it's going to fall off a cliff. So Matt Simmons covered quite a lot of the background to this in his Twilight in the Desert book. So looking at the mechanics of oil fields and things, and different kinds of oil fields, different rock strata and things, and how you extract oil from different things, definitely I think we are going to be seeing that kind of decline. And I think what's happened in this last year is really going to accelerate that, because what we've seen is a huge fall in oil demand and oil prices. For a while, they were well into the negatives because nobody wanted to take physical delivery, because all the storage was maxed out. So unless you wanted to take physical delivery of the oil, you didn't want to get 5 o'clock, to have that contract fall at 5 o'clock, and you were the one who was going to have to take physical delivery, and you didn't have anywhere to put it. So this was a huge problem. But the oil prices are too low even now, even although it's no longer in the negatives, because that squeeze has ended. But we're still in a position where the oil price is nowhere near high enough to support a lot of the production, especially all the unconventional production. And it's the unconventional production that is the only thing that has given the US its temporary status as a major oil producer, as a sort of #1 oil producer. This is not going to last, because there's no way these companies can continue at these kinds of prices. They are losing money all the time. And a lot of the fracking industry has been losing money the entire time. So a lot of it was really only about flipping land leases. So it was part of a real estate Ponzi scheme. Is we'll convince people that this piece of land has some really, really valuable resource on it, so they will give us lots of money to develop that resource. And then you try and develop the resource. And the problem with all the unconventional fields, you tend to have sweet spots. So for gas fields, you have sweet spots, you don't know where they are until you drill everywhere. So you have to drill all over the place. You get a lot of dry wells for the number of wells that are actually going to be productive. And when you do find productive wells in the sweet spot, they're going to deplete very quickly, 60 to 80% in the first year. So you have to keep on drilling. You're on a treadmill all the time, drill, 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 drill. And you're just not getting the energy returned on energy invested in this scenario. And it's costing an enormous amount of money. It's very capital intensive. So a lot of these companies have been taking on huge amounts of debt for a long time, for like a decade, taking on a lot of debt to be able to try and produce from these wells, to maintain market share. but it's really not working. It wasn't even working very well before we had the COVID crisis. But now we've got the COVID crisis and the price of oil has fallen off the cliff. All of these companies are losing money right, left, and center. So there's a limit to how long they're going to be able to continue. Chesapeake went bankrupt, for instance, just very recently. There will be many more. Trump likes to say that he's rescued the oil industry. What he means is he's trying to bail them out, but this is not going to change the fact that the oil price is too low for them to operate at anywhere near a profit. They're operating at a loss all the time, and there's nothing that Trump can do about that. So this is not going to work. The US is not going to be a major oil and gas producer for very much longer. And absolutely forget about trying to export. So the US has been trying to move itself into a position of being an exporting power. This is ridiculous. It's not even going to have the energy to supply its own needs, let alone have anything for export, because that whole industry is, it is economically marginal. It makes no sense in energy terms. And all of that, all of those chickens are about to come home to roost over the next few months, I would argue. So I do think we're going to see very large declines. The unconventional oil that everybody thought was going to make up for the decline and depletion in conventional resources is not going to do that. So then we need to look at the larger fields, which are watering out. So if you look at Cantarell and Bergen and Gawar, all these fields are falling dramatically. There's no way these are going to be able to keep up the production that they've managed to provide for decades. I mean, Gawar has been producing 5 million barrels a day for decades. There's a limit to how long any field can continue to do that. We still depend on these very large fields that are watering out. And with the decline rates being as rapid as they are, and at the moment, we're moving into an economic depression as well. So investment is going to dry up. We are going to experience an energy crisis. It will be obscured initially because with a financial crisis and an economic depression, demand falls so far that we may be able to satisfy the demand as it will be at that time. But that doesn't mean that we'll be able to supply the demand for a healthy economy. Supplying the demand for a crippled economy is one thing, but if the economy tries to recover at some point, when we start to move out of depression some years down the road, and the economy tries to recover, we are going to hit a hard ceiling at a lot lower level of energy supply than we've had for a very long time, because there will have been no investment for a very long time. Prices are not going to be at the level that you need for investment. Economic visibility isn't at that level either. When you're in a state of crisis, economic visibility basically just disappears. People don't feel that they have any sense of where the economy is going. And if you're going to think about investing in a long-term project, so if you're investing in an oil field, that's a long-term thing. You're not looking at a quick in and out. You're looking at developing a field, building the infrastructure to extract the energy and ship it somewhere it can be used. All of that is a very long-term thing. If you don't feel you have the economic visibility for the length of that project, you don't invest in that project. And even the people who have invested in these projects back at the point where they did feel they had that visibility are now finding those projects are no longer economic. And so they have to think, do I want to continue with this? Am I throwing good money after bad? Do I want to continue piling up this debt to stay in this business, or do I want to cut my losses? Those are the kind of choices companies are going to be making. So yes, we are absolutely going to have oil problems coming in the future, and it's going to be tied in with the financial issues that we have. And all of that has been hit on the head by a sledgehammer with this virus. So it was going to happen anyway, but it wouldn't have happened as quickly if it hadn't been for the virus. Because of the virus and all the disruption that this has caused in a very short space of time, only in about 6 months, we're finding that these trends are now playing out more quickly than they otherwise would have done, because there's been such an enormous fall in economic production. So yes, we're going to have a huge energy problem and a huge financial problem. We're going to have to get through both of them. I think the financial problem will hit us first, and then the energy problem will hit us after that. It will depend to some extent on where you live. But in America, where the production is basically fracking, I think they have an unusually large problem, because fracking just doesn't make any sense.
So this makes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so this makes me wonder, you know, where is where is the US going to get all of our oil? Are we going to get our oil out of Saudi Arabia? Are we going to get our oil out of Venezuela? I mean, where are we going to go get all our oil? Because we have this huge, massive military, right? So as long as there's someone who recognizes that we have this huge military, we're going to go get, and I'm saying we as the United States,
Yes.
corporatism, not me in particular, but what sort of scenarios do you see as far as there's oil, the oil is being depleted more and more rapidly? What are nations and organizations going to be doing? I mean, are they going to go after this oil? Are there going to be more wars in the Middle East, and war in Venezuela, and war in, you know, wherever else the oil is, the North Sea or whatever? Or is it going to be more of a ratcheting down? I mean, because to me, it feels like the U.S. is going to go get what they want, you know, as a military, and using the financial power of the dollar, the U.S. dollar.
I think they will. And the point is that the military doesn't care whether energy extraction is economic or not. So economics do not enter into the equation when it comes to national security. If you can obtain energy as a military power, you do, even if you have to do it at incredible cost.
It's okay if you answer that phone, Nicole.
Well, it won't be for me, and it will ring off in a moment. So I'm just ignoring it for the moment because there we go. Someone else will answer it downstairs. It's never for me. I just ignore it. So where was I? Yes. So the military doesn't care about the economics of the situation, and they will go and get it wherever they feel they have to. So they could simply take over production in the US and commandeer that production. They could say, well, we're going to keep fracking even if it's uneconomic because we need the energy and you're going to produce it and we're going to have it all. So this is possible. It's also possible that they might invade Venezuela. I think Trump has already said that Venezuela is pretty much part of the United States anyway, which is ridiculous. It's absolutely not. But Venezuela is a major supplier to the US, and the US has had its eyes on Venezuela for a very long time. So that may be one way that they get their energy. They have had an agreement with Saudi Arabia for a very long time, back to FDR and even Saud, I believe. So if you want to read more about that, again, Matt Simmons' book, Twilight in the Desert, covers all of that early stage. But essentially, there's been an agreement between
Nicole,
the US.
does this book hold up still, do you think?
I believe it does. Yes. I mean, yes, it took longer to reach the limits than he thought it would, but I don't think his analysis is fundamentally flawed. I do think that Saudi Arabia absolutely is reaching the end of their ability to produce at the level that they currently do. And I think in trying to produce as much as they have, they've probably damaged their oil fields and reduced the amount of ultimately recoverable resource. So this is my view anyway. So, but I do think that that book is still worth reading, even although it's been quite a few years and things haven't completely hit the fan yet. I still think Matt Simmons' analysis was very valuable. But the US has been in partnership, if you like, with Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia produces oil. It ends up being the market maker for the price of oil for a very long time. And the US then protects Saudi Arabia. And that deal has been stable for a very long time. I think there's probably more to it than just that kind of deal. I mean, for instance, George W. Bush let all of bin Laden's relatives leave the US very quickly after 9/11 and things. So I think there's quite a lot of personal familiarity between the US and the leadership of Saudi Arabia, even more so recently, because Trump and Saudi Arabia get along extremely well. And so does Jared Kushner, for instance. So I think that relationship with Saudi Arabia is likely to continue, but Saudi Arabia is not a particularly stable place. For a long time, the issue was the succession. Now it looks like the succession issue has been resolved with MBS in power in Saudi Arabia. But he pushes the zone an awful lot. I don't think his people like him very much. I'm not sure how stable his rule will be. So we'll have to see. But I think there are a lot of people who don't, a lot of Saudis who do not like their own leadership, because their own leadership tends to not be anywhere near as observantly Muslim as the population would like to see, being quite Muslim extremists themselves. So if you have 10,000 princes who are drinking and womanizing and all sorts of things, which you're not supposed to do as a Muslim, and they're the leaders of a fundamentalist Muslim country, then ultimately I think that is risky. I think there could definitely be a revolution in Saudi Arabia, or there could be sabotage that destroys so much of the infrastructure that it ceases to be an exporter in the way that it currently is. There was a problem at Abqaiq, for instance, an explosion at Abqaiq a while ago. I don't know exactly what has flowed from that as consequences, but this is the kind of thing that could happen in the future that will reduce Saudi supplies. Canadian supplies are also something that the US relies on a lot, but the tar sands are uneconomic. And at current prices, the tar sands are unconventional oil and gas as well. So you're not going to find that that's economic at current oil and gas prices. So I really don't think that the tar sands is going to be a source of oil for the US either. The US might decide, if it really wanted to push the zone, to try and take over the Canadian production. I don't really see how they would go about doing that at this point. So as much as they might have their eyes on the tar sands, I don't think that will necessarily come to anything. I don't think the US, even under Trump, is at the stage where it would actually invade Canada, but you never know. I mean, there may be worse political freaks elected down the line who might decide to do exactly that at some point. It depends how desperate they get. And it depends how intelligent they are as to whether or not they realize that there's anything there worth having or not. And there really isn't. And that is really going to be the problem when people realize that unconventional oil and gas are not going to be the future, because the energy return on energy invested is so terrible, and they require an energy price that's so high that the energy price they require will itself kill the economy. And then you'll have a fall in demand. You can't square that circle. This is going to be a huge problem going forward.
I think we need some sort of an analogy for this, the return on investment, energy return on investment. So
I like to use the carpet one.
Okay, well, let's think of an automobile, because people are familiar with automobiles. So would this be like you're in the mountains and your car is full of gas, but the nearest gas station's 300 miles away, and you know you're going to be on empty when you get there. And so you drive there, you're on empty, but you fill up your tank. And so you drive back, but you're going up into the mountains this time. So you don't get home.
Get as far.
So you drive all the way there to fill up your tank. I mean, at least you got there, right? You come back. I mean, that's the same thing, right? You use more energy to get what you wanted than you should have just went somewhere else. I mean, why go to the gas station?
They have problems like this in parts of, I think it's Newfoundland, where they were saying, this was some years ago, I remember listening to the radio in Canada, and they were saying that a local gas station in Newfoundland was closing, and the closest gas station to this town was going to be 3 hours drive away, which would be the exact scenario you were just describing. It would be so ridiculous to do a 6-hour drive to get a tank of gas. You would literally have to use the whole tank of gas to get there and get back. So if you hadn't brought a lot of containers to put extra gas in, you would not have gained anything by taking that trip. And the same could be said of the Roman Empire, where their fuel was wood, but it depends how far you have to go to get wood. When you've depleted the forestry in your area, then you have to go further away to bring wood back to be able to fire the city. You get to the point where the amount of energy you have to use to bring wood, to go and get wood and bring it all the way back to the center, is no longer enough. So you're using more energy than you're getting by doing it. And this is where your empire comes to an end. The Roman Empire arguably reached peak wood, and we are reaching peak oil. And we still have a fair amount of coal. Of course, that causes emissions and various other issues, and all kinds of horrendous negative environmental consequences with mountaintop removal and everything like that. Personally, I think the US will go back to using coal because they won't care about the environment if people are freezing in the dark. people will suddenly cease to care about anything like that other than the fact that they're freezing in the dark, and then they will be perfectly happy to go back to coal. And the US does have a reasonable amount of coal at a higher energy return on energy invested than its other reserves. So I think this is almost certainly going to happen. I don't think it'll be a good thing environmentally, but on the other hand, is it a good thing if a whole lot of people are freezing in the dark or melting in the dark, which could also be the option if you live further south? I think they will exploit every energy resource they possibly can, no matter what the longer term consequences, because in a crisis, people don't pay attention to the longer term. The longer term ceases to have any meaning. If you're cold and thirsty and penniless and hungry, tomorrow doesn't even matter. Today matters. It matters what you do today to find your next meal. But if you're in a crisis, all the longer term issues go right out the window. People don't care at all. And I think we're definitely going to see that. When discount rates rise, then we're going to see a whole lot of really short-term decision making. Humans are not very good at long-term decision making at the best of times.
When you say discount rates, that seems
it's
like
an economic term, but
yeah.
it also has meaning in psychology. So in economic terms, you'd be looking at, well, this amount of money is worth what today versus what it's worth tomorrow or a year from now. So you look at net present value and things, and the value of investments in the future, you discount to today to see if they're something that's worth it. But in psychological terms, the discount rate is just how much do you care about whether a certain thing happens now or at some indefinite time in the future. If you're talking about your next meal, you really, really care. So that's going to matter a lot. But other things that are very, very long term, like if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, anything longer term than that is off the table in terms of your concerns. So discount rate is the rate at which you discount the future in comparison to the present. And it doesn't have to be economic. It's just a question of, do you look at the things that are facing you now and the problems in your long-term future as being comparable, or do you care more about the problems now than the problems in the future? And the larger the problems now start to loom, the less the problems in the future are going to even get onto the radar. And this is a huge problem, because when people are hungry and thirsty and penniless and cold, they make short-term crisis management decisions.
It seems like a poor plan for a civilization.
It is, absolutely. You can't have a complex system operating without somebody at least having a look to the long term. And one of the problems that we have in Anglo societies is this increasing short-termism, because the market is God type attitude that people tend to have is all about leave it to the market will sort it all out because it's our resource allocating mechanism.
It's done such a great job so far.
And people don't realize the market has an incredibly short time horizon. It doesn't care beyond about a quarter into the future. It's what's happening now. And the only look at the future is in terms of what the anticipation of the future does to today. People are not really looking at the longer term in the market at all. You look at Native societies, Native American societies, or Chinese societies. I think in China, they look at 7 generations. I think when they implement policies, they're looking 7 generations down the line to see what effect this might have. Can you imagine anyone doing that in America? No. No.
So has this model of capitalism failed?
It is in the process of failing.
No, I mean, you know, the Earth is three-quarters of the land area has been, you know, denuded of nature basically on the Earth, and a big portion of the oceans and waters, and I mean, is it really a failed experiment like the like many more and more people seem to be saying?
Well, basically yes, but it's not the first time it's failed, and it won't be the last either. So we go through cycles, and one of the things that happens in an expansion cycle is we tend to liberalize things more and more. We open everything up because from an elite perspective, what you want in times of expansion is just give everyone total economic freedom, let them go out and generate wealth and tax it. That's your maximizing strategy if you are one of the elites at the top. You want economic freedom for your people in times of expansion. In times of contraction, you maximize your profits, such as they will be, by owning the means of production. So you throw out economic freedom because there's no point giving people economic freedom if there's nothing much they can do. They're not going to earn much, so they're not going to get anything from taxing it. So, or not much anyway. So what you do then is you get rid of this freedom business and you own the means of production. So you move into a centrally controlled totalitarian system. Rome did this under Diocletian. This has happened many, many times. So we had a huge blowout of capitalism at the end of the 19th century, for instance. They called it La Belle Époque, or the golden era, if you like. I mean, it was completely unbridled capitalism. Then you had the financial crisis of 1907 leading to World War I. Then you had the Depression leading to World War II. You know, things like that, periods of laissez-faire, which just basically means let everyone do whatever they want, always end badly. They're Ponzi schemes, basically. This is how it's structured. You have to have more and more new entrants all the time. So you have to more and more people coming in at the bottom of the pyramid, and that money then flows upwards to the top of the pyramid. This is how the system works. But if you don't have more people coming in at the bottom, because you've got, say, a lower birth rate, more and more people getting older, retiring, you haven't got enough young people providing pensions and things like that, you don't have the same kind of population expansion that you had before, you're not going to have that mechanism sending wealth up to the top anymore. That breaks down. And at that point, the elites decide that they want to own everything because that gives them the maximum ability to extract rentier profits from the process. So I do think we're going to see capitalism die again. I think in the future, we're going to see it come back again and people will be just as excited about it as they were this time. And it'll go on for a while and it'll fail in the exact same way and they'll throw it out in the exact same way that they're going to do in the next few years. These things are cyclical. Everything has happened before in terms of the economic structures that we impose. The technologies are different. The speed of communication and things is different. But in terms of the general structure of cycles of expansion and contraction and what those look like, that hasn't changed because that's grounded in human nature.
It reminds me of the movie The Matrix, not the first one, but the second or the third one. And the protagonist meets the godlike character, the architect, and the architect said, well, this is the 7th time we've done this, and you're the 7th Neo that's come to see me, and it's just gonna go again, and you know, do you want to reset this, you know, because this is normally when we reset it, and
pretty much. I haven't seen it. I must say, I've been in the room when that film was on. I wasn't paying attention at the time. I have seen the first one once, but I haven't paid attention to the other two. But yes, that kind of analogy is exactly what I was talking about. You have these cycles and they're nested cycles. So you have the small scale cycle, which is the business cycle. So you have, you know, a few years of expansion and then a recession for a couple of years. And that's the small scale, but it gets bigger and bigger. So when you start to look at what happens when a larger scale cycle moves into contraction, then you have a much bigger deal. So you maybe have a depression like the 1930s or the 1870s, or if it gets considerably worse, maybe you have something like the 14th century, which Barbara Tuchman wrote about as the disastrous 14th century, which was after the collapse of the Italian banking system, which was the world banking system at the time. And if you want even bigger than that, well, there's the Dark Ages, which lasted for several hundred years. So these things are all nested one within the other. And we're used to the smaller scale cycles, but the larger scale cycles don't happen within a human lifetime normally. So the chances are that nobody will have seen anything like this. No. There are a few people who've seen the Depression. That was at least 1 degree smaller than what we're looking at this time. So the people who lived through the 1930s,
You're such an
Depression,
optimist.
I try to be a realist as much as I can. So it's not that I want these things to happen, but I think recognizing that this is what's on the cards is really important, because if you don't know what you're trying to prepare for, how can you prepare for it? You know, I think this is a really significant event in human history that we're going to see over the next few years, a really substantial contraction. So we have two jobs. We have to think, how do we get through the contraction? How do we get ourselves through the bottleneck? And then the next question is, what do we rebuild on the other side? And so I think what we're going to go through, what we're going to go through is non-negotiable. This is going to happen. We can't prevent it. We have to get through it. But what we build on the other side, that is negotiable. So this is what we're trying to work on, to say, we get through the next few years. What kind of future are we going to build for our children, our grandchildren after that? And so we're doing the thinking right now. We're going through the thought processes to think what the future might look like. And if we've done that, we can implement that at the other end. Whatever ideas are lying around at the point where people decide that the contraction has gone as far as it's going to go and people want to rebuild, the ideas that are lying around at the time will be the things that people choose from. We want to make sure that the right kind of ideas are lying around at that point. This is what this thought process is for. It's not for trying to prevent a contraction or depression that we can't prevent, because that's baked in the cake at this point. We don't have to prevent that, though. What we need to do is think about what comes next. And we actually need, in some ways, to have a crisis in order to have a different kind of world, because people will not choose to go through hard times. They will not choose to use less collectively. Individuals might, but collectively, humans will not choose to use less and to live in harmony with nature. They just won't. Nature will force us to do that, and then we get to decide what we do on the other side. So we won't voluntarily reduce our consumption. We will be forced to, and then, having been forced to live within limits, we will be able to try and choose what kind of future we want to see beyond that. And we don't really know what's going to come out the other side. I expect it will be fewer people and a lot less knowledge, because a lot of electronically stored knowledge may not last all that long. People may lose the capacity to be able to access it, so we may have to do a whole lot of relearning again. That's going to be a huge deal. But I think what we need to do is learn to live much more simply. And I think a lot of the larger scale things will have broken down in the crisis. So with the thrust horizon collapsing and everything going down to small scale, we will rediscover functionality, because at small scale, these things can be functional. And then we can scale them up to the extent that where they still work, and hopefully not go beyond that. I don't have a whole lot of faith that humanity won't go beyond that again, because that's what we do as a species. But at least for a while, we won't go beyond that. We'll be living within limits. And beyond that, well, I won't be alive at that point, so I have no idea. I can't look that far into the future. I reckon you can make at least a reasonable view, a sketch view of the next several decades, which involves a lot of contraction and then quite a lot of conflict and not as many people as there currently are, for instance. So I would say all of that is pretty much baked in the cake. But the future beyond that is really not. That is a blank slate, and we get to decide what we want to write on it.
Well, and I'd like to kind of address also Addicted to Oil AU's question about the future. You know, for me, like Nicole was talking about earlier, I think that at the very beginning with geography, I think the future is going to be very, very, very dependent upon geography, and not just the original geography of the land and the changed geography, but also, you know, what's there. I mean, what buildings are there? What structures, what roads, what freeways, what cities? And so every place is going to be a little bit different. It's also going to be climate based. You know, northern Canada is not going to be the same as Venezuela, and that's not going to be the same as Central Africa, and that's not going to be the same as the mountainous regions of Peru or whatever. And so every place is going to be different. It reminds me a lot of how the world was. I mean, there were a lot of people around even 10,000 years ago, and they were all around the world more or less, and everybody was living in different ways, and in certain places lend themselves more to certain ways of living. And so the future is going to be not only a lot more local, as in people are going to, if you make a map of a person on a map where they are during their lifetime, it's not going to be like, oh, they went to Europe and they went to Australia and they went to, it's going to be, well, they might be around a lot, but you're going to have to zoom in to see that amount of activity. And
in the UK, people lived and died within 5 miles of where they were born.
Yes. And so
that was very typical. You weren't even allowed to move around. So if you decided to just go off and wander somewhere, you would not be welcome in any other place. The only people who were allowed to do that were pilgrims. So if you were on a pilgrimage, you could travel and you would be accepted in other places where you were not a known quantity. But if you just decided to wander off, you would not be accepted. You would probably be beaten out of town if you were not a known quantity. They would not have trusted you, and they wouldn't have given you an opportunity to prove yourself either. So yes, the past was profoundly local. And I think the future will be much, much more local than it is now as well.
Well, if that comes up again, I'm going to have to make a pilgrimage to Foss Eka. And, because I can't go to Mecca. I mean, that's not quite as, so Foss Eka. I'm going to Foss Eka because
you'd be very welcome to come and visit Aaron anytime.
you can come to Aaron Eka or Wissner Eka or whatever. I want to read, there's quite a few comments from Fred Lane and AB, and Addicted to Oil also has a few more comments. So I want to read those. So I'm gonna work from the bottom up, actually, the most recent. Yeah, well, kind of. Okay, so here we go. First, Addicted to Oil says, seems like coronavirus. Let me read all these, please, first.
Sure.
Addicted to Oil AU says, seems like coronavirus is linked to our energy predicament. What a coincidence. All the airlines shrinking 50 to 80%. Cars parked in garages. Mine's parked in, barely ever use it. It's costing me $4.22 a day, and I know that. And the most I've driven it in like a week is into the garage. So I paid 7 times 4, $28 to drive my car into the garage on electric only. So yeah, employers setting up for work from home, etc. Governments unable to solve the problem. Seems like they're planning something big. Pandemics, authoritarianism, lockdowns, and rationing. Wouldn't be surprised if the next one is 60 to 90% mortality. Oh, that's some positiveness right there. Addicted to Oil AU. And then I'm going to switch to Fred. Fred just was commenting about Daryl, and he said, his previous comment when I read it out loud didn't sound that nice. It was very, very informational. I'm just gonna say, and I'll apologize from Daryl's talk. I should have said, Daryl might talk this entire time, and that's okay with me, So this is not the Nicole and Aaron show. This is the Daryl show, and Aaron and Nicole are listening in.
Yeah, I was perfectly happy with that. Daryl is like a fire hose of information. He really is, and it can be difficult to drink from a fire hose. But and you probably have to listen to things multiple times to really take it all in, because he just covers so much ground. But it's because he's so phenomenally intelligent and well informed, and it's worth the effort. It really is.
Okay, so then I'm going to say, let's see. And Fred went on to say, and I don't know where Fred is, but he says, I can't get anyone who understands this sort of conversation. Even I've lost friends when I try to talk about it. It's very frustrating.
I can relate.
I've even tried talking to local government about it. I get no response. Yes. So yeah, you're not the only one, Fred. And then going back to AB, and I hope I've got all the comments here, but AB says, question for Nicole. Most, maybe, commentators are predicting interest rates to stay at record lows for years now. Do you agree? And if not, what mechanism would be behind any increase? And before you answer, this is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. So today I was trying, so in the United States, we were allowed to wait 3 additional months to do our income taxes. So tax day is coming up in 2 days, and I downloaded the software from the corporation to put in all our numbers for our various incomes, which is not a whole lot for me, but and it says, oh yeah, you know, I needed to pay another 1% into the federal government. Like the federal government really needs money when they're just spending it like crazy. But we also had the CD, and the CD was at it was like 18 months, and it was almost at 3%. It was 2.75, but it matured, and so the money went from the CD account into just the regular savings account. And my wife said, you know, the best rate we can get right now is like 1.5 or something, and that's, you know, kind of really upsetting. So yeah, this interest rate thing, for anybody that's a saver, right, who's able to save, you know, for anyone, I guess this can be interesting. Interest rates, many are predicting interest rates to stay at a record low for years now. Do you agree? And if not, what mechanisms would be behind any increase? So why don't we do that one, and then if we want to come back to some of those other ones, we can.
Okay, I do think interest rates are going to fall further from here. I think they're going to go negative, which is what they would, what they really want to try and do.
What you're saying is we should jump in at the 1.5%.
No, I would say jump out of the bank and hang on to it yourself, because whatever they're paying you is not any kind of justification for the risk they're making you take. So do not even touch the banking system at this point would be
some of us already have money in there. Like half of our net worth is in the bank. I mean, because we're older, you know, the viewers of this channel, a lot of them are our age, in their 50s. I mean, not all of them. There's some in the 40s and 30s and even 20s, but a good portion of them are in their 50s or older, 60s, 70s, 80s. And so, you know, we have money invested in stuff. I mean, not even invested, but we have money that's not in the house. It's you know, and we can't have, for some of us, you know, if we're upper middle class, lower upper class, we can't just have piles of money sitting in the house. I mean, there's too much money to do that. Which you know, that sounds very
dilemma to have.
That sounds very arrogant, but you know, also the people that have 2 hours to watch a YouTube video about this, you know, there's a certain very small audience that has this amount of free time.
Yeah.
You know. So, but go ahead.
Well, I think people do need a certain amount of cash on hand. And he who loses the least in a deflation is the winner. So everyone is likely to lose something. A lot of people are going to lose far more than just a bit of something. Anything that's in the system is at risk. So just bear that in mind. The risks associated with money in the system are risks that you have no control over whatsoever. The risks associated with money under your own control, they exist, but they're risks that you're in a better position to control. So fire and flood and theft and things are things that you can deal with. Whereas the risk of the financial system collapsing is not something that you have any control over whatsoever. So I would just bear that in mind when it comes to whether or not you want to leave things in the system or not. I don't think leaving them in the system is a great idea. Interest rates are risk premium. You are not being compensated for
Nicole,
the risk
stop
you're
for a
taking.
Okay, so imagine, just for your imagination, imagine there's somebody that has, like, let's just pick a number out of the air, $10,000 US or $100,000 US. Let's talk about both of those. Or,
I think if you have,
or one. Let's do three ways: $1,000 US, $10,000 US, $100,000 US. So we got 3 scenarios here, and of course, there's many more. So what would you, Nicole Foss, suggest to someone that's got, you know, a savings account that's just sitting there, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000? What do they do with that?
If you had 1,000 or a 10,000, I would take all of it out as soon as you possibly can. If you have 100,000, I would still take it out, but I would do it over time, because you can't take it out all at once, or you're going to get audited, or the IRS is.
Where are you
going to
pile the $100,000, Nicole? That's going to be like up to here on my. People are going to come over. They're going to be, well, why do you have piles of cash there?
You'd have to be pretty creative about it. So I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm
They're
just
going to have
saying,
US dollar bills. Are they going to have stacks of hundreds? I mean, is that what they're going to do? Are they going to buy gold? You've said gold isn't a great idea, and you said cryptocurrencies aren't a great idea. So, I mean, are they going to buy a bunch of euros and some Canadian dollars and some Australian dollars and some yen or whatever?
I wouldn't. What I would suggest is at least 3 months worth of whatever 3 months worth of expenditure is for you. I would have, if you can, at least that much in actual cash under your own control. So that's a different amount of money for different people. If you can, a year's worth. If you have more than that, I would say look to hard goods. So I wouldn't go for other fiat currencies. I wouldn't turn first to precious metals. If I had enough money and I did everything else that would be useful and I still had money left over, then I would think of precious metals. But
now for hard goods, you're gonna have to be very, very clear, because
so things like,
so just imagine there's someone who's never watched us talk before. What is a hard good? Is that a glass? I mean, is a hard good a lamp? Is it some binoculars? I mean, what exactly is a hard? Is this good? I mean, is this good enough to be a hard good? You know, what's a hard good?
So think about what you would want to have if you were totally looking after yourself, if you didn't have all the plugged in aspects to the life support systems that you currently have.
So like if there was an invisible wall that came around my property and I couldn't get in or out
within that property that would make your life easier. So it's things, I mean, if you have a lot of money, you're talking.
Could I draw the wall at least around a few neighbors as well? Because
you could do that. If you're a group of people, absolutely, you can do that.
Okay, so we got a little
better if you do.
Did you see the? Did you read the book or see the TV show Under the Dome?
No.
Okay.
But I presume that's Biosphere 2 that they're talking about.
No. This is Stephen King, I think originally wrote this.
No, I have not seen
it. And the idea was that this dome drops down over the city. In, you know, he writes from Maine, so it's over the city in Maine, not a big city, it's a town. It just drops over it. It's about 3 miles in diameter, and you can't get in or out. Nobody can get in or out, nothing at all, not even a little bit. So, but I don't think we're talking about smaller, like neighborhood scale, 10 houses or something. 10 households.
Something along those lines. Just think about what you would want to have access to. What tools would you need? You're going to need land. You're going to need shelter. You're going to need access to water and energy, things like that. You're going to need tools. You're going to need sharp edges. You're going to need the ability to build things. You're going to want a bunch of nails and screws, and you're going to want storage containers, wind-up radios, solar battery chargers, rechargeable batteries.
Should we be directing people to the prepper channel right now? I mean, because there's a lot of them.
Some of that prepper aspect is useful.
So which part isn't useful then?
I'm not so keen on the whole idea of guns and ammo, quite frankly, because the way that tends to work out is my little nuclear family is going to sit in this heavily armed fortress and will be fine as long as I can stay awake 24 hours a day to defend it. I just think that's ridiculous. So that's not going to work. I mean, you have to have more people than that. You have to have.
We could be in shifts. We could have no dose, lots of caffeine. We should buy caffeine pills, you know. And those little.
It's not that people won't have to defend things. They might have to, but the idea of just being totally isolated with a bunch of guns and a bunch of canned food does not sound like a solution in any way, shape, or form to me.
Now, if you were in the movie Tremors, though, that looked pretty good. I mean, he had his little house. And he had Meredith Baxter Burney as his wife, and things were, I don't remember what.
Short term, but longer term, you want community and you want shared assets. you want communal assets, and you want other things as well. You want to own a certain number of things, but you want to be able to share them out as much as possible so that other people who didn't have the capacity to purchase whatever piece of equipment it is can also end up using it. And people can do all kinds of exchanges and for that. I mean, whatever they have, they can, I don't know, give you, well, I was going to say half a dozen eggs, but you're vegan. So whatever the vegan equivalent of a half a dozen eggs is, people could give you for the use of your rototiller or whatever it might have been that you have. So I think absolutely people are going to have to look at the kind of tools that they're going to need, to think about what they're going to need to do and what things they're going to need to be able to do it, to provide for the essentials of their own existence at the most basic level, if at all possible. And if it's not possible to do that individually, then to do it communally with a group of people, because all sorts of things are possible when you put people together to be able to achieve it. Even if those people don't themselves individually have very much money, the skills that they have and the pooled resources will enable people to achieve things they couldn't possibly achieve on their own, which I think is really important. Now, on the interest rate question that started all this, I think interest rates will fall to start with even further. I think they will go negative. The reason for that is for stimulus. The idea is...
But they can't go negative in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is not going to go negative. They're never going to go negative, Nicole. They're just not.
They are working on trying to do that. The problem with trying to do that is that if interest rates are negative, then whatever money you have in the bank, you will be charged to keep it there. Not only will you not get paid interest on it, you will have to pay for the privilege of leaving it in the bank. Now,
well, I have to interject a story, and I know I'm interjecting a lot, but the local bank closest to where I live started doing that on the checking accounts if you didn't do anything with the checking accounts. And they started charging me like $3 a month or something. I'm like, you're charging me $3 a month to have a checking account? No way. So I took my money out of that bank and I got a cashier's check and I took it to my credit union and I said, are you going to charge me? And they said, no, we'll give you 3% interest as long as you're making 20 transactions and direct deposit and whatever. So I mean, if somebody says we're going to charge you to have your money here, it's going to have to be everybody does that. Otherwise, we're just going to whoop, jump ship.
Exactly. So if everybody does it, which is very likely to be what would happen, then people will do exactly what you just did, take their money out of the bank, because they're going to say, I'm not paying for the privilege of keeping my money in this institution. I mean, even if you're paid interest, they're not compensating you for the risk you're taking. And if they actually make you pay for the privilege of taking that risk, it's even worse. So that's called
and this drives me crazy. People forget, when you have money, cash, and you take it to the bank, you are making a loan to the bank.
An unsecured personal loan.
You are loaning them money. That's what you're doing. It's unsecured. They're not saving it for you. Right. You're loaning it to them. So
absolutely you are. And people will not do that if interest rates go negative. So the zero lower bound is the point where if you go below that, everyone takes their money out of the banking system. This is what they can't have, because of course you will crash the banking system if you do that. So if you want interest rates to be negative, then you eliminate cash, or you find a way to discount cash in relation to electronic money. So you tell people that you have to find a way to reduce the value of cash. Like you might take out of circulation every 20th $5 bill or something like that. Just say, okay, these ones with these numbers are no longer legal tender. Or you can find other ways to do it, to say, if you pay electronically, the price is this. If you pay in cash, it's more. There are all sorts of ways that you can do that. And that is exactly what I'm expecting them to do. It will be harder in the US than it is in other places because cash is more used in the US. So it will be much harder to get rid of it. That's why I think they will do things more like saying the cash price is higher than the electronic money price, because that's a way of reducing the value of cash without actually making it not legal tender.
Okay,
so
say that again. I think I missed that.
So
where am I going to pay more? cash than electronic? Exactly.
At the moment you don't. At the moment, if anything, there's a cash discount.
You know, this is kind of interesting because I was thinking about this. So right now, you know, MasterCard and Visa and Amex, American Express, whatever, Discover in the US, you go and you buy your taco. You go buy your taco at the restaurant, and the taco is $1. And you buy the taco, and Michigan has 6% sales tax. So we pay $1.06 for the taco. You can run the credit card, and you know for sure they got to pay the 6% on the dollar to the state. So they have the dollar, the restaurant has the dollar, but they have to pay like 3% of that to the credit card company, or 2%. Yep. So they're only getting 98 cents.
Yep.
So, but if I pay them $1.06 cash, they don't give me 2 cents change. So they're already charging me more for the cash, kind of. You know, I mean,
expect that to get worse.
They should be giving me a discount of a couple percent.
And some places do.
And if it's $100 charge, for example, they should be giving me like $2 off. Is that right? Yeah, $2 off. But they're not giving me $2 off because they're running the credit card. I find it really annoying.
So if you're paying cash, you're cross-subsidizing the people who are paying by credit.
Yeah, annoying.
And that is going to get worse.
It's going to get worse.
Basically.
So you're going to get like, they'll say use credit and get a 2% discount like that?
Or 10% or something. It depends how much they want to make that incentive really bite. But if they want to make it bite, then they can really make it bite. So, but I think after that, after we have the period of interest rates falling, I think they're going to shoot up very rapidly, because when you move into actual crisis, real full-blown financial crisis, as in banking meltdown and things like that, interest rates are a risk premium. There is no way that people who still have money under circumstances like that are going to lend it to anyone else for anything other than a massive interest rate premium. So I think we're going to go from negative interest rates.
And it'd have to be short term as well, right? Because if the interest rates are climbing, you're not going to loan money out for 10 years.
Yeah,
you're going to loan it out for a month.
Yeah, longer term will attract even higher interest rates, because there are going to be all sorts of ways that they differentiate risk. So short term versus long term, you know, inside the country versus international, things like that. Who's borrowing the money? Are they young? Are they old? If they're retired and you know they're on a fixed income and it might not be here in a few years' time, you're not going to lend them a mortgage or something like that. If they're young, well, do they have huge amounts of debt, or do they actually have an income? There are going to be so many ways that people differentiate the risks associated with different people in different circumstances. And anything that is perceived to be risky, the interest rates will go absolutely through the roof. And not only that, that's the nominal rate. The nominal rate will go through the roof. The real rate will be higher, because the real rate will be the nominal rate minus negative inflation in a contractionary environment. So whatever the deflation rate is, so negative inflation, you're going to add that to the nominal rate of interest to get the real rate of interest. So the interest rates will absolutely kill people under those circumstances. Right now, it's savers who are suffering because they're not getting any interest on their savings, and people are finding it's almost impossible to get a decent return on investments. That's why they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for return, investing in ridiculously risky things just because they feel they need a certain amount of return. Then they're going to lose the income and the capital. Whereas they should be investing in things that pay rock bottom rates of interest, because those things are safer. That's how you preserve your capital through a crunch. But you get rid of your debts, and then you don't get killed by the high interest rates when they come as well. That is going to be really, really important. It would not take much of a rise in interest rates to push debtors over the edge. People tend to take on huge amounts of debt and only think about the monthly payment. As long as they can manage the monthly payment under today's circumstances, they think it'll be fine for the life of a 25-year loan. It won't be. Interest rates in that time are going to absolutely skyrocket. That monthly payment will go through the roof. And this is just going to be horrendous. And in the 1980s, interest rates were 21%.
Are you talking about Are you talking about if someone is not on a fixed interest rate on their mortgage?
Well, if you're fixed, it
'Cause I
depends how
think
long
you can
it's
get,
fixed for.
I think you can get like, for a 15-year, I think you can get about 3% in the US, 3 or 4%.
Banks won't be offering deals like that in a crunch, I guarantee it. And if they have offered deals like that, they will probably renege on them. So I can imagine them offering fixed rates for short term, maybe. But when things really start to hit the fan, they will not be offering deals like that. Banks don't offer deals where there's too much uncertainty and there's a risk they might lose. So you never take a fixed rate mortgage when banks are pushing them, because the only time they're ever pushing an interest rate, a fixed rate mortgage, is when they think the rates will go lower, so you will get screwed. So only ever go for a fixed rate when the banks really don't want to give them, and go for the longest term you possibly can get out of them if you're the mortgagee. But if you're the person offering the mortgage, then don't offer long terms at all if you possibly can, and charge as much interest as you possibly can for the risk that you will be taking. So as a lender and as a borrower, those are two very, very different circumstances. I think people are going to get killed over their debts.
So let me tell you some of these rates here. So my credit union says fixed rate, 15-year, 2.6% APR, 30-year, 3.2% APR. What are these other ones? Variable, 15-year, 4%, and 30-year, 3.2% again.
That's really quite interesting, because that says
wait a second. Adjustable rates. 3-year adjustable 2.8, 5-year 2.8, 7-year 2.8, 2.8, 2.8, 2.9 to 7 years. I don't know why I could do a 7-year refinancing or something. I don't know what that would be, but
what it suggests to me is that the bank has a very low perception of risk. And this is absolutely typical for the top of the bubble. Everybody thinks risk has gone away, not just the individuals, but the banks and the governments as well. Everyone thinks, throw caution to the wind. We don't have anything to worry about here. The top of the bubble, people are not risk averse. They will actively embrace risk, and they will not ask for a reasonable risk premium for doing so, because they're so optimistic that they think things are going to continue to go well. Now, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And I think banks or financial institutions that are offering deals like that should seriously take a look at the financial statistics around the world and realize that there's no way that kind of interest rate will compensate them for the risk premium over 30 years. And so either banks like that go out of business entirely because they've made terrible deals,
well,
or they renege on those deals.
I like this 2.6%. I mean, I think I should buy something at 2.6%.
Just don't assume that will stay.
If it wasn't for well, it says fixed rate on though. It says fixed rate right on it.
So this reminds me of the feed-in tariff regime in Ontario. So it's not interest rates. We're talking about payment for renewable energy, and this is the arrangement that they had. So the idea there was you would take out a 20-year contract with the government, and they would pay you a certain amount for that 20 years for the energy that you put onto the grid. And I said at the time, you trust the government to keep its word for 20 years? That's very, very naive. And of course, all around the world, feed-in tariffs are being cut like crazy. People are being told, well, you can only charge for a certain number of hours of your renewable energy production.
You know what happened with mine? Because I have that on the roof. So it was fine for a while. So they're paying me like 50 cents per kilowatt hour originally, 52.5 cents. And the electricity here costs about 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, that's fine. But then they decided, oh, we're gonna charge you an extra $6 a month because you're a user of electricity. So 6 times 12, 36, is that right? 6 times 12, no, 60, $72. And since you're putting electricity on the grid, we're gonna charge you $6 a month as well. So,
Yeah.
so we're paying
This is exactly what they do.
$72 to be hooked up on both sides. So $144 out of nowhere. They just,
Yeah.
that's $1,440 for 10 years.
This is exactly what they do. They change the rules when the rules are revealed to be advantageous to them. So if you are the party with the power and things go against you, you just change the rules to screw the people that you're working with because you have more power than they do. This is what will happen. So people who assume that a deal that they signed today is going to last for a long time, even in the teeth of a crisis, they're dreaming in Technicolor. It's not going to happen. These powerful institutions will change the rules when it suits them to do so. And people will have absolutely no ability to do anything about it. They'll just have to live with the results.
But wait a second, because if the house values are going down faster than people are paying off the principal, then as long
negative equity.
As long as the mortgage is not one of those ones where you get screwed if you try to get out of the house, where you can just send the keys back, then it's not a big deal though for you, though, is it? Because if you're locked in at this 2.5% and they start doing something that's going to mess you up financially, you can just say, well, I guess I'm getting an apartment somewhere else then.
Yeah, if you still have a system where there's jingle mail, yeah, you can do that. So this would suggest to me that they're going to change the rules about jingle mail really, really, really soon. So they haven't done it yet because right now people don't perceive that there's a housing crisis coming up, another mortgage crisis. There is, but they don't realize it yet. So
it's not really showing up in the housing market in Michigan.
It's not yet, but it's absolutely going to.
Like because when is it going to happen? Is it going to happen in October? Is it going to happen in February? I mean, how close are we?
I think we're going to start to see things show problems within a year because you're going to get a whole bunch of renters evicted. You're going to have all sorts of people who can't pay their mortgages who are going to eventually be foreclosed on. Depends how long it takes to foreclose on people. People might be able to live in a house for a whole year without paying a mortgage before they actually get kicked out. So for some people, that will be the way to do it. Not every state has mortgages as non-recourse loans, though. So people absolutely have to be aware of the rules in their state. It is state level decision. So a recourse loan is where if the house is foreclosed on and sold for less than you owe, they can come after you for the difference because you still owe that same amount of money. If a mortgage is a non-recourse loan, then all they can do is take the house back. And if it sells for less than you owe, that's their problem, not yours. But that is at a state-based level. I can't remember exactly. I have a feeling that mortgages are non-recourse loans in Michigan and recourse loans in Wisconsin, but it could have changed. This was a long time ago, and I'm scraping the bottom of the memory banks there for that. But people need to check that out for themselves.
Okay, I got 2016. It says non-recourse states include Alaska, Arizona, Washington, Utah, Idaho, Minnesota, California, North Carolina, Connecticut, North Dakota, Texas, and Oregon.
So not Michigan.
These states only allow non-recourse loans. In other states, you may have either type.
So if you are getting a mortgage, I wouldn't recommend getting a mortgage, but if you are getting one, make sure it's a non-recourse loan because that way you can walk away if you have to. It will screw up your credit. So you better make sure if you're going to do that, that you've got yourself a new apartment before you screw up your credit. Otherwise, you won't be getting a new apartment. So there are all sorts of things to be aware of. But yeah, people who are taking out mortgages are likely to find that the interest rates are going to go up markedly. Either they're floating rates that will just naturally rise, or they're fixed rates, but the financial institutions will find a way to get out of the deal because it would bankrupt them to not do that. If their existence depends on these mortgages on their balance sheets, and there are too many mortgages that are going to go against them, that would put them out of business. So they'll change the rules instead. They may go out of business at some point anyway, but they won't. They will try and do everything to avoid going out of business before they actually admit and surrender. I think interest rates could be high. In the 1980s, in 1981, the interest rates hit 21% in Canada. I remember this because I was quite young at the time, but my father had a whole lot of problems with his business at that stage because they needed to raise capital and it was incredibly expensive. So that was a huge, huge problem for them at the time. Now, if interest rates hit 21%, how many people in the US would be able to service their loans? Not very many, I'm thinking. That would break almost everybody who owes money. But that's exactly what happens to interest rates in a credit crunch. They go through the roof. And that was the nominal rate. The real rate would be higher. So this is why I tell people, do not carry debt if you can possibly avoid it. Better to live in a shoebox that you own outright than to live in something big that the bank basically owns, because the bank will just take it away from you. And then they will, if it's a recourse loan, they will also come after you for the difference and put you into debt slavery for the rest of your life.
Well, this is when you got to get out in the streets and you say, you're not going to kick all 100 of us out of our houses in this community. You know, there's 100
people
of
did
us.
that in the Depression. So there were farms and things that were foreclosed, and the neighbors all got together and agreed that not one of them would bid on this property, and they wouldn't let anyone else bid on it either.
Was there something in the film, The Grapes of Wrath, where someone comes with a tractor to bulldoze the house, and then the guy comes out and he says, he's got his gun and he says, no, you're not going to bulldoze my house. And then he sees it's like a friend of his that's brought the bulldozer. And so he's like, well, who should I be shooting then? You know, because you were just hired. And, you know, because the guy on the tractor says, if it's not me, it's somebody else is going to be here tomorrow. So anyway, go ahead with your story.
Yeah, everyone should watch The Grapes of Wrath, by the way, and read The Grapes of Wrath. It's a really good look at what happens in a depression. I would really, really recommend it. But yeah, there were communities where people refused to allow things to be sold off in foreclosure, but that wouldn't have happened everywhere, because property prices were plummeting and banks took all kinds of assets all over the place in foreclosure. And if they couldn't sell them, sometimes they just bulldozed them because they weren't worth anything to the bank. The bank just wanted the land. Yeah, all sorts of bad things happen in times like that. So if people can possibly manage to be out of debt, you know, owning is not the be all and end all. I mean, I rent, and renting is something that gives you flexibility. It means that you can go where you need to go, where the jobs are. And if things go badly where you are, you can go somewhere else. And that kind of flexibility can actually be really important. And if there's no other way to get out of debt, then that's not a bad option. Renting is not throwing money out the window. Renting is paying someone else a fee to take the property price risk for you. And that is not a bad deal under circumstances like we're facing at the moment. Yeah, there are problems with renting. I mean, you might have rental inspections. You can't do just whatever you want with a rental place. And you might not have all that much security. If your landlord is repossessed, then you might have to find somewhere else to live. You might have to move more often than you want. But still, it gives you flexibility, and flexibility can be worth quite a lot in times of crisis. You know, if you want to own, then do everything you possibly can to own it debt-free, because otherwise it's at risk. And whatever investment you've put into the property could be taken away from you if you have debt on it. So there are different ways of doing that. You could share the place with someone else, so you've got more income streams. If you have to carry debt, at least you've got lots of income streams to pay it down. You know, there are ways of being able to do these sorts of things, but it's not necessarily simple, and it can be quite disruptive to people's lives. So the way that the assumptions that people have built their lives on are about to be invalidated pretty much across the board. And then it becomes a huge problem, because people don't necessarily then have the resources to be able to adapt to the new circumstances. You know, if you're stuck and you're in a position that doesn't work, but you don't have the money to get out of it and find some other way of being, then that's a much bigger problem. This is why you have to get out of it in advance, before everything hits the fan, because it is so much harder to do it after. If you are trying to sell a place that you can't really afford, but you try and sell it too late, in a bear market, real estate will be illiquid by then. You won't be able to sell. Or if you do sell, you'll be selling it for less than you owe on it, and you'll be in negative equity. And this isn't really an escape. So the thing to do, if you possibly can, is to get out of debt before everything gets really, really difficult. And we're already heading in the direction of everything getting really, really difficult. So there's not a whole lot of time. Already it's going to be a lot harder than it would have been, say, a year ago. But you know, if yesterday would have been the best, today is still the second best. So I really think people should be thinking of trying to get out of debt if they possibly can. You won't be able to cope with the interest rates that are coming. So you need to get out of debt. You need to have a certain amount of cash on hand. Whatever control over the essentials of your own existence you can possibly manage would be a tremendous benefit. And meet people, work with people, build relationships of trust. These are the real currency. These are the things that are going to get you through hard times, if anything will. So it's a very different way of living than people have been living up to now, but we have to be adaptable. Circumstances change, and the future belongs to the adaptable under times like that.
Rents are not cheap where I live.
I pay $750 a week.
No way.
Yes. And what is that in US dollars? How many rooms do you have? Like I'm looking on Zillow. And normally I don't say the name of property prices are much higher here than they are in America.
It's the cheapest I was able to find was $1,000 a month. There was one small place which was like $900 a month. But I mean, that's expensive for a lot of people for a two-bedroom.
Oh yeah. I mean my eldest stepdaughter, eldest stepdaughter was living in a room in a duplex, so that she and 3 other students, they had the downstairs, someone else had the upstairs. Their downstairs, half of this house in Wellington, cost them $850 a week. So that was $200 a week each, roughly, for the people who were sharing that apartment. We pay $750.
How many people?
That was 4 people.
4 people.
So one couple and two extra singles.
How many?
They were paying $850 a week for a 3-bedroom apartment.
3-bedroom apartment, $850 a week. So
and that's for students. That's student accommodation.
3,400 times 12, so that's almost $40,000 a year.
Yeah. There's a lot of poverty here because people cannot afford the house prices or the rents. I mean,
where do they live then?
Okay. We have a house. Well, it's hard to describe how many bedrooms it has because people kind of cobbled it together over lots of years. And so it's a question of what is a bedroom anyway? There are all sorts of weird rooms that are tacked on to things here. So it's a very strange house. I would say it's probably more or less a 4-bedroom house, except one of the 4 people is sleeping in what other people would call a living room. We don't have a living room anymore because it's a bedroom. But this place is $750 a week. It's right on the sea. It's a nice house. It's a reasonable size. If it's
right on the sea, that's pretty nice for $3,000 a month.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of things are right on the sea. This is a small place. It's an island.
Well, that's 36,000. That's. I mean, what is that in U.S. money?
The seaside is not as rare here as it is in the States, shall we say? But still, I mean, places here are very, very expensive. If you wanted to buy a single-family home in Wellington, nothing special, just a basic single-family home, you're looking at $1 million.
Okay, so I'm going to translate this. So you're paying 3,600 New Zealand dollars. So in US dollars, that's 2,350 per month. So
I should say my partner is paying that. I'm not, because I don't have any.
You could get a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2,000 square feet house for rent, not so far from here. So I guess that's kind of comparable, I guess. Because you're in a house, not a.
This is a house, yes.
Okay.
It doesn't have a garden, and it's really run down. And if we owned this place, we would have to invest $250,000 in fixing it. But we're very glad we don't own it because this is somebody else's problem.
This reminds me of one of my cousins. My cousin is 30 years old, and he recently found that he had not as much work as he had imagined he would be having, and so his income has dropped a lot. And he's moved back in with my aunt and her newer husband. And I was talking to her and I said, well, you know, in the US, the average is that kids will live with their parents 9 additional years past high school. and he moved away for a long time. So I think, you know, it might be 9 years that he's living with you. And her face kind of went ashen, and she was like, oh no. But how can a person afford
Exactly.
to live? I mean, because there's, you know,
the younger generation can't afford it.
well, and the employment rate in the US is like the lowest percentage wise as it's been since the Great Depression. Like only 40% of able, you know, adults between 18 and 65 are working a full-time job. So it's like the lowest number, you know, when you look at how many are actually employed. And so that means there's lots of people that there's just no jobs for. There's just no jobs at all. No way.
Absolutely.
Because there's no way they can all get a job because they're on it. I mean, you might be able to get a job, but you can't employ everybody when there's only half the jobs.
Absolutely. Yeah, unemployment is going to go through the roof, and then people won't have any bargaining power, because if there are 100 people who'd happily do your job for half what you're being paid for, forget having any bargaining power, either individually or collectively. So wages will fall, entitlements will be eliminated, benefits will disappear. So people are going to have a lot less money than they currently have. There's another reason to get out of debt if you possibly can, because the income people have now is not the income they're going to have in the future. And so the costs that they can bear will be a lot less as well. People should be thinking about renting, downsizing, tiny homes, and things like that. I personally love tiny homes. I am currently researching tiny homes, and I intend to come up with the best possible design for one. Maybe not the tiniest of tiny homes, because we will have at least one kid living with us at the time, I would think. And so I do studio work, and my partner works from home. So we probably need about 400 square feet. I reckon we can do it with about 400 square feet. So I'm looking for the best possible
square
design.
Feet in New Zealand?
No, we don't.
Do you use square meters?
We use square meters. But I still think in terms of square feet, because that's still what we use in Canada. Canada is weird. We are mostly metric, but not for everything. We still quote our weight in pounds, our height in feet and inches, and distances. Some people will use miles, some people use kilometers. We'll still talk about pints sometimes. You know, and
I don't even talk about pints. We use liters a lot here, so.
So I still think my brain does not relate to square meters in terms of what size of house is that. My brain does not do that calculation. But if somebody said this house is 2,000 square feet or 4,000 square feet, I would know exactly what they meant. It just depends where you come from.
Let's see, 2,000 square feet is 186 square meters.
So this house is 200 square meters. So it's roughly that. That's what we get for our $750 a week with no garden.
That's slightly larger than our living space then.
It's a good sized house. There wasn't a lot to choose from. It was either something that was bigger than we needed or something far too small that we would have had to pay extra for storage that we couldn't afford. So we went for the bigger house. So we struggle to pay what it costs to live here. And we can only do it for probably about another year and a half. And then we'll be looking at whatever else we can do beyond that. So we're looking to try and find a postage stamp sized piece of land that we can put a tiny home on. And hopefully that will work.
I was trying to look up, the last I remember, the township I live in, the zoning ordinance says you have to have a house of at least 1,200 square feet. So that's 111 square meters. And that's the minimum. You know, you can't build legally a house. They won't give you a permit for it. I mean, you could go and ask and say, you know, I've got, you know, I'm a nonprofit, you know, person. We're doing an experimental house. We're going to live in it for 10 years and, you know, see if it's possible to live in an 800 square foot house. But they might be like, no, I don't think so.
I spent a year living in a truck, which was, I don't know, well, about half the size of the room I'm in at the moment. This room is probably
is that since I've known you?
Yes. The first year I lived in New Zealand, I lived in a house truck. So I had a little tiny bedroom over the cab of the truck. And then the back part of the truck was the rest of my house.
A house truck? A house truck? Like a RV?
Well, sort of. It was a 1953 Bedford truck that someone had converted into kind of a gypsy caravan type of thing.
I visualize this.
So it was really, really old. I have pictures on my Facebook page. I will send them to you.
Yeah. Put it on the Facebook page.
It was awesome. I loved living in a truck. There was only me at the time. And that was all the space I needed. And in fact, I didn't even use most of the space I had. I would lie down at night in my little bedroom bit. And then in the day, I would just sit up, prop myself up against the wall and work all day and then lie down again at night. So I was actually using about 3 square meters, or roughly anyway.
3 square meters. A square meter is about 10 square feet. So that's like 30 square feet.
Yeah, that was most of the space that I used almost the entire time for a year. The rest of the truck was where I kept my stuff.
That's smaller than my son's clubhouse, because where we live,
stand up in it.
Where we live,
you can sit up in it. Where
we live, you can make a shed that has 100 square feet floor space without a building permit, or they can't refuse you, but you can make it like 15 feet tall, if you make a roof on it and everything. Yeah. So my son's actually in their little shed, their little clubhouse. They have a second floor, so they have almost 200 square feet, so almost 20 square meters.
Yeah, that's the size of a tiny home. I mean, I would build one bigger than that, because I need to have space, because I do seamstress work and things. I do a lot of craft work, so I have all my supplies, and I would need a studio for that. So I reckon I can do that in about a 10 by 10 space. And then in a space for actually sleeping and doing my other work, it only has to be tall enough for me to sit up in it. So a loft is absolutely fine. A loft with a queen size bed in it, I would spend almost all my time in there or in a studio. And occasionally I would go into the rest of the house to cook something. But even at 400 square feet, I would not use most of the space. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people could live in a lot less space than they think they can.
All right, I want to go through like a list of things here, because I'm getting tired. And as fun as it is to chat, Fred asks, do you think we'll have a debt holiday?
Unfortunately not. I wish we would. I really think a debt jubilee would be a fantastic idea. And you would actually come out of something like that with a system that worked better. But I don't think they're going to do that, because the creditors would be ruined in the process. So in a normal business cycle, you tend to ruin a bunch of debtors. In a bigger cycle, you ruin all the debtors. In the biggest ones, you ruin all the creditors too. And that's when you have the biggest contractions. The creditors are not going to vote for anything that will ruin them. And they're the ones who have all the actual power. So I don't think there will be a debt jubilee. As good as it would be if there was, I don't think it's very realistic. Now, there might be one kind of in practice.
Not in democratic nations, right? I mean, yeah, because if it's like a dictatorship, then the dictatorship could say, well, I'm thinking like China.
Oh, yeah, they could. I don't think China would be able to do something like that, because their shadow banking system is so massive. The scale of the debts are so massive that they would actually ruin everyone in the entire country if they did a debt.
Islamic countries, Muslim
Some countries may well do that. Some of the smaller ones, where there isn't a huge amount of debt anyway. I mean, in Islamic countries, you're not supposed to charge interest. There is Islamic banking and ways around this, but you don't have huge amounts of debt everywhere. And the places that don't have huge amounts of debt, yeah, they could cancel that debt and it would be better for them. Whether they will or not, I don't know, but it would be doable, and it wouldn't ruin their country to do it if they don't have a huge amount of debt.
So you think there's going to be a debt jubilee? I'm going to run through some countries. You ready? New Zealand?
No, I don't think so.
Australia?
Developed countries, I don't think so. None of the developed countries, every one of them is past the point of no return, and they're all very much market devotees, especially.
So it's not a bad idea. It's just you think it's unlikely, very unlikely.
I just think it won't be implemented, because the people who have the power to implement it wouldn't do so, because it would ruin them. And so I can't see them voting. It'd be like turkeys voting for Christmas, and I can't see them doing that. So or Thanksgiving, I suppose. But there may be places where that will be possible. I think the places that will do best are places where people don't have unrealistic expectations, where they live a pretty basic life and they have the range of skills where they pretty much do everything for themselves. And they don't have any debt because they probably don't have a lot of money, but they manage to cope. And places like that, people like that may not even notice when there's a crunch, because they're not dependent on the system. But if you are dependent on the system, which pretty much everyone in every developed country is, that's when you have a problem, because every one of those developed countries is past the point of no return in terms of debt. Every one of them is going to have the same problem. So if you're looking at developed countries, it's like we're on the 100th floor and we're about to fall out the window. Some of these other places, they're about to fall out the window, but they're on the ground floor. This is not such a big deal for them. So we have to think of who's going to come out of this better. And it's not the people who've done well out of the expansion. The people who've done the best out of the expansion are the people who are the least suited to do well in the contraction on the whole, because every assumption they base their lives on is to do with this. The expansion happens and this is how you exploit an expansion for personal gain. But when you no longer have an expansion, those strategies don't work. So unless you can completely change your strategies on a moment's notice, then you're not necessarily going to do anywhere near as well in the contraction as you did in the expansion. Plus, you'll be a target because everyone will say, this person did really well out of the expansion. They must have screwed other people who were more deserving. So then you paint a nice big target on your forehead. Like if you have done well and you have visibly done well, so you're living in a big house and posh house, wearing designer clothes, driving posh cars, don't do that. Because that is exactly the sort of thing that says, I have done spectacularly better than all my neighbors. And that's the sort of thing that makes your neighbors not like you so much. So there are a whole lot of things people need to bear in mind going forward, I think.
That's one of the reasons that even though I covet a Tesla and I theoretically could buy one, not going to. Because the one person who I know who drives a Tesla, every time I'm like, that's really braggy right there. That's really braggy. Driving that thing around.
There's at least one house that was in the little town Stittsville. It's sort of more of a village really, or a tiny town near where I used to live in Canada. And there's one place everyone used to say, that's the drug dealer's house. Like it was like Doric columns and surrounded by normal, ordinary little houses in a small village in Ontario. And there's this massive pile, and just don't do that. It looks so out of place. It looks ridiculous, and everyone is going to ask questions.
Now, what people can do is they can have a basement, and then a sub basement, and then a sub basement, and then the basement can go under the backyard, and then you can have like this amazing house that has.
You can do that. And you would be better off to do that.
It reminds me of that place, and this isn't really funny, but that place in, I don't know, it was in Europe somewhere, where this guy had built a house like that, but he used it for very nefarious reasons. But the house doesn't have to look fancy on the top to be fancy on the inside. That's all.
Yes.
Okay, so here's some things before we go that I'm wondering if we have a little time to talk about anyway. So taxes and the 2-week update. I have not been reading the news for the last 2 weeks. So first, though, taxes. Federal taxes. It seems like a pointless thing for us to be paying federal taxes when we know that the government can make as much money as they want and just send it out to whoever wants. Why are we still paying taxes to the federal government? I understand the state and local governments, because that's where they can't just make money out of thin air. But why are we sending it to the federal government? Like, so I'm doing my taxes, and my taxes say, oh, you got to send another 1% of your family's income. Okay, so let's just say that's $1,000. You need another $1,000 from us. Why? What are you going to do? You're just going to pointless. Why?
Yes,
so then I can't spend it. I mean, I probably would spend it eventually. I mean, that seems like a dumb idea to have people paying in taxes right now. when you need more spending right now?
I think that there's a huge problem in the States at the moment, precisely because everything has been bailed out. All the big players have been bailed out. And all the little players are saying, excuse me, but you said we didn't have enough money for a Green New Deal or this or that, all these other things that we wanted. There are other problems with the Green New Deal. I don't want to get into that all right now, but all the other spending priorities that people have, the things that actually make life better for ordinary people. People are saying, excuse me, you said we didn't have the money for that, but you've just printed how many $1 trillion and handed it all to your buddies on Wall Street? This is the kind of thing that makes people really angry. This is the kind of thing that leads to tax strikes and stuff like that, precisely because people would say, why should I send you my hard-earned money when you can obviously just print whatever you want and give it to your buddies? You know, why should I be funding your priorities? Just run up your printing press. So I think there are going to be problems with people saying, I'm not paying taxes. And if enough people do it, then it ends up being an issue. And it's not just taxes, it's the law in general. So people are starting to see that there's one law for friends of the president and one law for everybody else. What do you think that does when it comes to people, whether they're going to decide to follow the law or not? They're going to say, laws are just for the benefit of rich people. I'll do whatever I can get away with. And then the rule of law dies. So the rule of law means the rich people, everyone follows the same set of laws. That's obviously not the case in America at the moment. So it's very clear that if you are a friend of the president, you can do whatever you want. You can get away with whatever you want. There will be no consequences. But for everyone else, there are consequences. And even if you're not looking at the president, if you're looking, so you just got caught for weed. Are you white or are you black? It's going to make a huge difference to what happens to you as a result of being caught with weed. There are so many disparities in the justice system, and this is just adding more to those. It's adding a whole nother layer of corruption that's obvious. So I think this is the kind of thing that leads to people saying, I'm just going to do everything under the table if I possibly can. Why should I pay taxes to these thieves? This is the kind of mentality shift that happens. People stop thinking, well, you know, I need to pay my taxes because we need roads and we need this and my kids go to school.
I think an important point here is, if you start as an individual, starting to have new thoughts like this, like maybe I'd rather be paid under the table. If you're starting to have thoughts like that, you're probably not the first one.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of other people that are starting to have the same thoughts.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, if you're getting depressed about the economy, it's probably not just you. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So by knowing oneself and what one's own thoughts are, one can kind of read what's going on within your socioeconomic group as a whole.
It's interesting if you look at Italy. I mean, Italy has had grotesquely corrupt governments for half of forever. And you look at the stats for Italy and people say, oh, the economy isn't necessarily doing so well. And it's like, yeah, but what you're looking at is not the real economy in Italy. They know their government is corrupt. Everyone who possibly can does things under the table. The Black economy in Italy is massive. When I was in Italy lecturing, they were so down on their own country. They say, oh, we have this terrible government and you know, things just don't work. And I'd say, don't be depressed. You're living in the future and you already know how to live like this. You already don't trust your government. You already do as much as you possibly can for yourselves. You already have huge range of skills. You have community, you have strong families. You people will be absolutely fine. It's everyone else who trusted their government who will find that that trust was misplaced. And not just governments, but institutions of large scale, whether you're talking public or private, the system in general. Italians don't expect the system to serve them. They expect to have to survive despite the system. So that's exactly the attitude that you want to have if you're moving into hard times, where you don't expect anyone to deliver, to help you from outside. You expect to help yourself. You expect your community to come together and work together. And if you already have that mindset, that is a winning mindset in times like this. It's the people who think, oh, well, the system works fine and the government will do what it's supposed to do and all the pharma and the medical system, it'll all just work out the way it's supposed to. And then when it doesn't, then you have a huge problem. so trust can be extremely misplaced. And I think the Italians are actually a step ahead in that way. I mean, they have very low debt. People don't part with land on the whole once they own it, because they know that land is what you really need. I mean, they just have a completely different mindset than people in the Anglo world in general. And I don't just mean the States. I mean, the entire Anglo world has this market dependent sort of view where you trust the market will provide. It's not going to happen. It's a fantasy. And I think all the people in the Anglo world who've bought into that fantasy are going to have a big problem as a result, whereas the people who had a different way of looking at the world are probably going to do much better.
I want to insert a commercial because if anybody's watching right now, if you could do a thumbs up, that would be awesome. Mm-hmm. And also, if you want to subscribe and sign up for all notifications, that would be awesome as well. And comments are always appreciated. So, news. Over the last 2 weeks, I've not looked at the news. I haven't looked at Google News or Automatic Earth or Zero Hedge or anything. Anything interesting going on in the world? I mean, is there a country burning up? Did a war start? You know,
the COVID cases are spiking in the States, particularly in the South. And so at the moment, the cases are going up. So you had a graph that's sort of like this. You had a lump and then it went down, and now the cases are going exponential again. The death rate is still falling. So what you have is now a bunch of people saying, oh, well, it's really not a problem that we've got all these cases because the death rate is still falling. So we've just figured it out and we don't have to worry about anything. To which I would say, deaths are a lagging indicator. And you would not expect to see the deaths result from these extra cases for at least a month, if not 6 weeks. So the US is in a way bigger pickle than it thinks it is with COVID at the moment, because those cases are rising exponentially. It is totally out of control. So they're doing more testing, but they're not only testing more people, they're finding more and more and more positive cases all the time. So if your positivity rate is rising, then you have an out of control outbreak. And that's exactly what they have in the southern US. So Arizona is the worst. Florida is terrible. Florida, I think, had 15,000 cases yesterday. Florida had more cases in a day, I think, than South Korea had in its entire outbreak. So it's crazy the extent to which this is just absolutely mushrooming in the States. So this is going to be something that America is going to have to deal with. There need to be more lockdowns, not necessarily everywhere, but there need to be more lockdowns in the hotspots. There need to be national mask mandates and things like that. I can't see it happening. Trump has at least decided to wear one once. I imagine they didn't let him into Walter Reed without one. So he probably didn't have a choice. It amuses me that he thinks it makes him look like the Lone Ranger, because that gives me an image of him with a mask over his eyes rather than his mouth, which kind of fits with what I know of his intellect. Thanks.
Nice.
But yeah, so the COVID is a huge issue in the States. That's going to be a major, major problem. The demonstrations are still going on. They're not really being covered very much anymore. So it's kind of like the media wants everyone to forget that these demonstrations are going on. Well, they are going on, and the brutality is continuing as well. There was one particularly disturbing video yesterday out of Portland where there was this young guy just holding up the sign, standing on the sidewalk, holding up the sign, not doing anything. They shot him in the face. He's in critical condition in the intensive care unit. So these things are happening, and this is absolutely brutal. There's a huge movement to defund the police, which I think needs to be explained. It doesn't mean get rid of police departments or don't give them any money. What it means is look at the functions that the police are being asked to perform. And are there some of those functions that would be best performed by social workers, therapists, whoever else it might be? So it's a question of saying, let's take this pot of money that we have for looking after the community in general and reallocate some of it so that we're not necessarily sending armed police officers with no training to deal with, say, psychiatric cases and things like that. It's really not appropriate. That's not the kind of person you would want to send into those circumstances. They don't have the training and bad things will happen. Send a social worker. Social workers and nurses don't kill people. They bring people down from the brink every single day, and they do it every day without killing anybody. So
you know what would be interesting is if the police had like 2 different color uniforms, and the ones in blue were the ones who their job was to protect people from death and injury, and then the people in red were the ones who were protecting buildings and cars and infrastructure and whatever. And that way you'd be able to, when you were calling, you'd be able to say, you know, my building is in danger. Or you could call and say, I'm in danger.
There are all sorts of ways you could do it, but it's just a question of saying, we don't want all the money for the community to end up in a place where the solution is always send an untrained person with a gun. Now, I don't mean untrained as in completely untrained. They've obviously been trained in how to use a gun, but they haven't been necessarily trained in how to de-escalate a situation when you have a psychiatric patient having a meltdown.
What would happen if instead of guns, police were the guns were taken away and the billy clubs and everything, and they were only given hammers?
In England, they always used to have, well, it was a billy club. It was a little stick. It was about that long. That was it. So even now, most police officers in the UK are not armed, and you just don't have the same level of violence at all. I think you've had an arms race.
Police don't kill as many people in the UK?
Oh, God, no. I mean, nowhere in the state, nowhere's as bad as the States for that, except the few countries where the police are actually a protection racket. You know, there are places where the entire
what's the U.S. comparable to as far as the number of murders committed by the government upon its own people?
I don't have numbers like that in my head, but I just know that, I mean, the level of violence and things in the States is so much higher than anywhere else I've ever lived anyway. People own a lot of guns in Canada, but we don't have that kind of violence up there. I mean, they own hunting rifles. It's not so much people having handguns all over the place, but I mean, I know a lot of people with guns in Canada. It's just not seen in the same way. Guns are tools. It's not a sort of Second Amendment religious right type of thing. It's just not seen in the same way. There's not the same emotional attachment to the idea of guns. And you don't have anything like the problem with all those school shootings and things. I mean, that will come back when they open schools again. That'll be another thing to worry about, apart from the virus itself. I don't think I would want to send my kids to school if I lived in America. I think I'd homeschool them.
Well, in our school district, we have just this week been given the choice. We can either send them back to school, everybody wearing masks, except during, eating lunchtime. At least for the kids 10 and older. The kids younger than that, they're like, well, we're not sure about masks or not. Or, we're going to do, you can choose just to keep the kids home and homeschool them with, our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the stuff yet, but we'll have it. We'll have it all set.
What are you planning to do with your boys?
Oh, we don't know. Yeah, because that's August the 25th or something. And that's 6 weeks away. I told my wife I was fine either way. I mean,
well, at least you're a teacher.
They will either wear masks or they will be schooled at home.
Here, everything is opened again. It's all normal. So my 11-year-old stepdaughter is back at school, no problem at all. She takes the train both ways. We don't really think that's a risk at this point either, because there's no community transmission, as far as we know, in New Zealand. So for the time being, it's all fine. Who knows? It might come back again. We might have a second wave as well, because
how have you guys been doing for the last 2 weeks? Have you had some more cases or no?
Well, we have, I think there's about 20 cases here. They're all in managed isolation or quarantine. So when you come into New Zealand, you're in managed isolation for 14 days. If you test positive in that time, then you move to quarantine. So you're not allowed out into the environment for 14 days after you arrive, no matter who you are, no matter what. the end of story, you will stay in these places. Sometimes people have sort of escaped, but not too much. So I think we don't have community spread at the moment. And that's good, because that means our lives are basically entirely normal and
Are you
nothing
guys
has changed.
going to open up your border with the rest of the world?
I hope not, because that will be the guarantee that we'll have a second wave. So people who
do you think borders are going to open in general? Like I was talking about earlier, the border with Canada, for example, and the one with Mexico. And I mean,
Canada would be crazy to open that border anytime soon.
Really?
Absolutely. If I was, I am Canadian, but I don't live there, but absolutely, I would not open that border with the States at all for the rest of the year at the very least.
The rest of the year? What about all these couples that have been separated?
I would find ways to deal with individual cases. But in terms of mass movement, no, I would not suggest mass movement between Canada and the
tourism industry. I mean, Michigan lives on tourism, and so does Ontario and Toronto and Montreal, Quebec.
People are going to have to learn to take holidays where they live or close to where they live, because it's just not going to be possible to move around to the same extent. It's far too risky.
Ooh, the shores of Lake Erie. I'm so excited to go. I'm going to go to Disney. What is it going to be? Disney Inflatable Land on the shores of Lake Erie.
When I was growing up, our holidays every summer, where we drive about an hour and 15 minutes down the road to a lake with a provincial park, and we set up a tent for a month and kind of hang out at the beach and swim in the lake. So we didn't have to go very far, and we absolutely loved it. To this day, summer holidays.
Where did you live?
I lived in Ottawa.
Oh, in Ottawa. So Ottawa is the capital.
Ottawa's the capital. So we used to camp at a place called Black Lake, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from where we used to live.
In which direction?
West. So sort of south and mostly west.
Okay. So towards the direction of Toronto, kind of.
In the Canadian Shield area, where there's lots of rocks and pine trees and lakes and stuff like that. So we would just camp there for a month, and we had an absolute blast just playing in the sand on the beach and swimming. And we were allowed to buy comic books only for that month of the whole year. And that's the only time we were allowed to have pop. So we absolutely loved it. And it was very close to where we lived. We hardly ever went anywhere when I was young. Then when I got older, when my parents had a little bit more money, we went a bit further afield. But there was nothing wrong with having camping holidays. As a kid, there was nothing more fun than that. It was brilliant. So, and in New Zealand, I mean, tourism is huge here, but this is an incredible place. I mean, people who live here can have the time of their lives just vacationing in their own country. And for people who haven't seen all of it, I've seen almost all of New Zealand. I've seen far more of it than most people who live here.
But there's got to be some tourism places where there's just not enough people coming in to support their economy. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Number one, because of course there's less money available, but number two, because nobody's coming.
A lot of tourism places are going to go out of business. Same with restaurants and theaters and all these, and gyms, the indoor places where people spend a long time sitting in close proximity. I don't think people are going to be doing that for a long time. And I think almost all those places are going to go out of business.
What about professional spectator sports in the US?
I don't think they'll have any spectators in person for quite a long time. But given that most of them are outdoors, it could be worse. So, I mean, protests as well are outdoors. It could be worse. So I think if we have to do mass things, make them outdoor things, because you don't have the same accumulation of virus in an enclosed space that way. So I actually think they should try and teach outdoors if they possibly can. On any half decent day, take the kids outside if they possibly can. And I realize in the winter in Michigan, it's not so easy.
Here's an idea. In Michigan, instead of having our 3-month break during the summer, it's almost 3 months long, this break, we could have it during December, January, February.
You could.
During the snowy time. And we could drive all the parents crazy because the kids would be trapped in the house. And they'd say, sorry, kids, go out into the snow. I don't care that you have to have 3 layers on, 6 layers on.
My kids loved the snow. When we moved from England to Canada, they'd never really seen more than a tiny amount of snow before in their lives. And we got a dump at the beginning of December in the
Are
year
you a
2000.
UK citizen as well?
Yes, I have 3 citizenships.
How long did you live in the UK?
I was born there.
Well, I know that.
So I lived there for 4.5 years to start with.
Yeah.
And then another 12 years later on in life.
Okay. So what else is going on in the news in the last 2 weeks that I should be tuned into? Because I wish like Zero Hedge just had, you could sort the last 2 weeks by views or something. And you could put in 2 weeks, sort by views, bam. Or like Democracy Now! And you could say, okay, sort by, most relevant. But you can't do it. I don't know of anywhere where you can say, I haven't been paying attention for 2 weeks. Bring the important stuff to the top.
It's difficult. And I don't take breaks because I know I won't be able to catch up if I do.
That's why I'm asking you.
So, I literally do this 7 days a week, pretty much all the time. So issues with the virus as well that came out. It seems you can get it more than once, that antibodies don't necessarily protect you. Some people produce antibodies, but they don't necessarily last for a long time. So it looks like you might be able to get it more than once. That could also be a problem for the perspective of generating vaccines, because you can end up with something called antibody-dependent enhancement, where if you do have antibodies, instead of protecting you, the antibodies can actually help the virus get into the cells of your own immune system, like HIV does, and take it over that way. So
I was with a group of people about a week ago, and in a very candid way, they were just asking each other if they were going to take the virus, but not the virus, the vaccine, once it was available. And they all said no.
I won't. There's no way. They are rushing this vaccine through the testing process. They are not testing it adequately. I'm not a great fan of vaccines in general, and I certainly would refuse any kind of mandatory vaccine. I think mandatory vaccination is just absolutely unethical. So I would never go along with that. But for this particular one, they are rushing this through. They are not going to be testing it adequately. And I am not going to inject myself or my family with a barely tested product that goes past all the outer layers of your body. Your body is supposed to protect what's inside it. So on the outside, there are risks, there are germs and things like that. On the inside, it's supposed to stay dealt with by your immune system. When you're injecting toxins through that envelope, then you can cause other problems. So I actually have a major...
Are you an anti-vaxxer, Nicole?
Yes.
Okay, we just want to make sure that's clear, because there might be somebody watching that's like, she's an anti-vaxxer. Well, at least we've cleared that up.
I would expand on that to some extent. Sure. I would say I'm absolutely 100% against mandatory vaccination. I'm not against people choosing to vaccinate if that is their choice. If people want to make an informed decision and they do so and they vaccinate their kids, that's entirely their business and it's nothing to do with me. So I don't tell other people what to do with their lives. What I do say is...
even the polio vaccine? I mean, would you be like...
Polio's a bit different because you take it orally. So it's not like you're going through the envelope. You're not injecting it. All the polio I've been vaccinated. So my polio was always taken orally. And that is less of an issue as far as I'm concerned. But what I don't like is injecting things like aluminum into the bloodstream, because aluminum is toxic. And there have been injections of aluminum, mercury, all sorts of things are in those vaccines. If you look at the inserts, the package inserts in those things, you look at the list of ingredients, and then you read the side effects. And these are side effects that the manufacturer is telling you about. So this is not information coming from some rando on the internet. If you just look at the package inserts, this is what the manufacturers are telling you about these things. I would strongly suggest reading one of those and then think about whether you ever want to inject anything like that into your kid again. I mean,
We have
I
to get
would-
off this topic though, because somebody's going to be like, this is not just crazy channel, this is insane channel. So
yes, I know. It's very difficult to have controversial opinions. And I
well,
have
and this one in particular, I mean,
opinions.
this is like the number one.
Yes, I know. I know.
I mean, it's almost worse than like pro-life one. I mean, because it's like, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're ridiculous.
I know. And the things that people say, I've been absolutely amazed at the kind of discussions around this issue that have unfolded on social media. It's like you cannot discuss this issue in a civil, calm, reasonable way with pretty much anybody, because the instant you raise the issue, everybody goes ballistic and they all stop listening. And not only that, but then they start thinking, you must be crazy. I'm not going to listen to you about anything else either, which also becomes a problem. But I would just say there's a lot in this issue that people are not looking at. And when they say all these people are crazy, well, some of them are. There are crazy anti-vaxxers. There absolutely are. But all the ones that I personally know are extremely well educated, often in the sciences, often in medicine, and they have very, very good reasons for their opinions. So we can leave it like that if you want. I would say, though, that it does vary. Like, they're not all equivalent. So what you'd need to do is say, what's the benefit? What's the risk? And they don't all have the same benefits. They don't all have the same risks. So you'd have to look at it for each one separately and say, well, how many people do I have to give this to in order to save one life? And what cost do I pay for doing that? So if I'm going to save one life, but I'm going to make, I don't know, give 50 people autoimmune disease, have I won? No. These are the kind of things, I made those numbers up. This is not any particular vaccine that would have those specific numbers, but that's the questions that you have to ask to say, what's the benefit? Who are you going to save? And at what cost? What sort of things happen when you do this? And the assumption tends to be that it's all benefit and no cost. Whereas the anti-vaxxers would say it's all cost and no benefit. And I would say it's somewhere in between. So you can't ignore either side of it. And we really just need to look at it as a much more complicated issue than it's being looked at right now. Right now, it's black and white, good and evil. Nothing is like that. Nothing works that way. We just have to look at it in all its complexity. And I love complexity, so that's exactly what I always do. My approach is to say, look at the data, look at the complexity, and say, where do I fall on the risk-benefit analysis for this particular instance? And certainly for a COVID vaccination, it would be, no way, Jose, am I taking your vaccine? Absolutely not.
Well, so while you've been talking, I was looking up this vaccine, because you said side effects. So I'm looking up this HPV vaccine, human papillomavirus vaccine.
That's one of the worst ones.
Gardasil. Well, so I've been asked every year at my son's annual. He's 13 now. So for the last 3 years, I've been asked, is he ready to get the vaccine? I'm like, no, I don't really think so. But
he's a boy. He doesn't need it.
So I'm scrolling through and it says side effects. Well, this is meant to genital warts, right? So that's the real thing. Apparently 70% of people in the US, who are my age or older, have had genital warts at some point in their lives. And one of the important side effects includes Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Guillain-Barré syndrome, that is horrendous.
Right, which apparently is something that happens with your nerves, Yeah,
you want to spend a year in the ICU completely paralyzed?
Yeah, and it says, I'm looking at Mayo Clinic, and it says there's no cure for this syndrome.
It's time.
But there are 2 types of treatment that can speed recovery and reduce. So yeah, that's
basically, your son is not going to get cervical cancer no matter what. So
but he might get genital warts from somebody.
I would say any risk at all is not worth taking for a condition that he has no capacity to get in the first place.
So it says Gardasil is used in boys and men ages 9 through 26 years of age for the prevention of the following diseases caused by HPV: anal cancer, genital warts, and lesions including anal intraepithelial neoplasia. But it's not nice. So this is the thing. It's not nice that only the girls have to get this in the US, because that's not fair.
Yes, we want to make the boys take a risk as well for a condition that they can't get. You know, I wouldn't do it. I seriously wouldn't. I mean, it's obviously up to you, but I have a huge problem with this. Gardasil has been banned in a number of countries because of the range of side effects, and people have died from this. So particularly in Japan, you can look up Gardasil in Japan, for instance. And this is an issue. I would not recommend Gardasil to anyone at all. I think it's one of the very, very worst. The other one I would never take is a flu vaccine, because flu vaccines don't even work most of the time. You'd be lucky to get a 10 or 15% benefit from it, if they get the strain right, which they usually don't. So again, it's all risk and virtually no benefit. Why on earth would anyone do that? So I realize you want to get off this.
All right, yeah, let's get off this time. I'm sorry, I beleaguered it. Lengthened it. Okay, anything else that I should know that's happened in the last 2 weeks? Because when I go on Automatic Earth or Zero Hedge or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, I don't want to be totally blindsided by, oh my gosh.
Well, there was a story of 28 million people on the verge of being evicted from their apartments in America over the next while, because they can't pay their rent. So that could be a huge problem. And there are very likely to be food shortages in the fall, because although things are okay at the moment.
In the US or in?
US, particularly in the US, I'm thinking, because so much food had to get basically wasted because it couldn't go to restaurants and things. So I think there are going to be shortages potentially. Plus people are going to have a lot less money.
But the US can go get food because we have a huge military.
Yeah, and they might do that. But the thing is, does the administration actually care whether people don't have food or not? And I would say they really don't care. So I'm not sure that they would do anything on behalf of ordinary Americans, because really they only care about rich Americans.
Well, that seems like a big issue. Right, it is a big issue. A food issue.
It is a big issue.
Because that's an issue that would be like until May, right? Because it's not like we have a huge growing season in the US in the winter.
Yeah, you can import food if you can afford to do that, and America can afford to do that. But the question is, what is it prepared to spend to benefit people who the administration regard as useless eaters?
Useless eaters.
That's exactly how your government sees the vast majority of your population. They only care about themselves and their rich friends. This is it. So everyone else is on their own. And that is going to really hit people very, very hard. I mean, other governments have given people 80% of their salary. They've had mortgage and rent holidays. So people are not destitute in other places because there's been the appropriate government support. In the US, there's virtually nothing. And it's just hanging people out to dry.
What's going on with the Trump and Biden race?
Well, Biden is winning everywhere. Even he's 5 points up in Texas. Trump is set for the biggest drubbing in American electoral history. But at the same time, he's rigged the election. So who knows what will actually happen. But if the election was free and fair, which I don't think for a minute it will be, there's no way on the face of the earth he would win it. Because it isn't going to be free and fair, it's a little harder to say. At the moment, Biden is ahead. I mean, he's elderly. He could drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow. I mean, there's so many things that could happen.
Well, then Sanders can jump in.
All sorts of things could happen.
They haven't had the
drop dead.
They haven't
74.
They haven't had the Democratic primary, right? Or the
Biden
convention yet.
They haven't had a convention. Biden is basically the nominee.
Right. But if he was to drop dead between now and the convention, then Sanders could be the nominee.
That might be possible. Or they might try and float in someone else. They might try and draft Oprah or Michelle Obama or somebody. I mean, who knows? There are some things that are just not really terribly predictable. What's happening, though, is all these dirty tricks at the moment, just dirty tricks absolutely everywhere. They're going to try and slime Biden in every possible way. They've managed to convince the Ukrainians, the corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor, to file charges against Biden in Ukraine, even though he hasn't done anything illegal. This is just absolutely manufactured. But this is the sort of thing that they're doing. They're also, William Barr has set up John Durham, a prosecutor, to investigate all the origins of the Russia investigation. The idea is to say that the entire Russia investigation was completely fraudulent and then prosecute all the people who were involved in it. This is the goal. Whether or not it'll actually come to that, I don't know, but Trump is absolutely in the process of trying to jail his political opponents. So another authoritarian fascist thing. It's only at the beginning at the moment. John Durham hasn't put out his report. We shall see what dirt he actually manages to manufacture on this. But Trump has been talking about jailing Comey and McCabe and Adam Schiff and all sorts of people. He's trying to track down whistleblowers and have them arrested. And so one other thing that you might not have seen in the last couple of weeks is he commuted the sentence for Roger Stone. So do you know about that case? That was a major Mueller case.
You know, all those cases, just there's so many of them. I mean, all these people, it's so tiring listening about all these old white guys, you know, and yet another old white guy whose name I have to remember. And I mean, for most people in the US, I think it's like.
Yeah, most people don't know any of the details and don't really care either. But this trial was actually quite a big deal. Stone was convicted of 7 felonies. Stone is a self-admitted dirty trickster with a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. So he's not a very nice person. And he basically said to Trump, I didn't rat on you. How about commuting my sentence? And Trump commuted his sentence. So this is criminal in itself. That is yet another impeachable offense because it basically amounts to a self-pardon. He commuted the sentence of someone who refused to tell on him, basically. And he didn't pardon Stone because if he pardoned him, that would have amounted to an admission of guilt. Then Stone would not have been able to plead the 5th and he would have had to spill his guts on Trump or be jailed. So he commuted the sentence rather than a pardon, but the commutation.
What is to commute a sentence?
To basically say, well, yes, you've been convicted, but it's all gone. I'm just getting rid of all that. So all the jail time, all the
that's different from a pardon,
release time, the fine and everything is all erased by this. It's completely corrupt. Obviously.
That's different from how's a commutation different from a pardon?
A pardon is basically saying we erase this conviction. It's gone. That doesn't happen anymore. But you have to have been convicted, found guilty to be pardoned. So he could pardon pardon Stone, but Stone then wouldn't be able to plead the 5th. So that would be dangerous. So commuting the sentence is basically one step short of a pardon to just say, well, yes, but we're going to erase all the punishment. The punishment will go away. And so you're free. And that's basically what he's done, but it was illegal to do that. So you have to have already started your sentence for it to be commuted. You have to be in prison at the time, and you have to not be challenging your conviction for a sentence commutation. No, those conditions were not met. So this is an illegal sentence commutation, but it's the most corrupt thing that Trump has done so far. So the law Twitter has just been burning up with this issue for the last week or so.
How's this going to end up playing out?
Well, it could actually spark a complete revolution at the Department of Justice. There's so many Department of Justice lawyers who have said that they just can't stand it anymore, that the whole system is being corrupted and they don't want anything to do with it anymore. There have already been several prosecutors who've walked off various cases because William Barr has interfered with all the cases that involve Trump to try and make them go away. He's a cover-up artist. This is what he did for Iran-Contra in the 80s, the first time he was Attorney General, and he's doing it now for Trump in the exact same way. He's trying to make all the cases go away. He replaced. This
goes back to the call that we had 3 weeks ago because we were talking about the corruption and the U.S. political system in particular. And William Barr, he was on the list of your he's a, in leagues with Lucifer, basically.
Yeah, basically. His father employed Jeffrey Epstein and things. So his father wrote this science fiction novel about sex trafficking and then hires Epstein, unqualified, to teach a bunch of 17-year-old girls at the school he was headmaster of. So there's all sorts of dodgy details that go along with all of this. But there have been quite a few prosecutors in these cases who've just not only resigned from the case, resigned from the Department of Justice, and now they're testifying to the House Judiciary Committee about all the illegal things that William Barr has been doing. So he replaced the head of SDNY, Southern District of New York, that was prosecuting a bunch of cases. So he got rid of Jeffrey Berman, but Jeffrey Berman refused to leave because Barr didn't have the right to fire him. So Jeffrey Berman managed to organize it so that his own deputy would take his position, not the person that Barr was trying to float in. So now those cases will continue. Barr has also replaced the head of EDNY, Eastern District of New York. That's where the Trump inaugural cases were being tried. He's going to make those go away as well. And basically Ivanka is the one on the hook for that because she squirreled away millions from the inaugural funds. And that was about to be proven by EDNY. So now a Trump loyalist is running EDNY, and that case will probably go away. But who knows how independent SDNY can manage to maintain. Their nickname is the Sovereign District of New York, so they are fiercely independent. But we'll see how independent they can manage to be. They are still under the control of William Barr, and Barr is as corrupt as they come. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes.
Where's this William Barr guy come from? I mean, has he been in the administration since the
beginning?
He
was Attorney General in the 80s at the time of Iran-Contra.
I mean, how did he get into the Trump administration? How recently?
He wrote a 19-page letter about a year ago, auditioning for the position, basically saying, I believe in an all-powerful presidency with no oversight and accountability. And like by the way, I'll make all your problems go away. and so he was chosen.
Who did he replace, or do you remember?
Matt Whitaker, who was the acting attorney general, who was not in any way qualified for the position, but he's a Trump loyalist. That's why he was put in there. He did a terrible job and was booted pretty quickly. But the whole administration is staffed by people who are patently unqualified to do the jobs they're doing, or are totally corrupt in the way that they do those jobs. There aren't any people in the administration, in the political appointees in the administration. There's not one who has clean hands.
Well, I'm supposed to interject, but the Clintons were the same.
Well, I don't think politics is ever clean. Washington has been a swamp for half of forever. I mean, there's tons of corruption, but until recently, it was kind of smaller scale. It was still bad. There was a lot of illegal stuff that went on there. There was a lot of bribery and corruption, but it didn't take over the whole country.
Now somebody's going to say, but don't forget about Obama. He was bad too.
I think he just didn't really have any freedom of action to do anything. I mean, he probably came in thinking, I'm me and I'm good and I have all these good ideas and I'm going to change everything. And then probably somebody sat him down and said, Mr. President, you're the figurehead. You're the salesman for other people's policies. You better realize that because we know where you live. So I would imagine that he didn't. And the Senate, and Mitch McConnell absolutely says, I didn't let him do anything. Mitch McConnell.
Justin is still very upset that the last time, and then Justin Amash, still upset that the last time anyone was allowed to put a amendment on a bill in the House of Representatives was like 4 years ago now, or something. So it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago. He's so peeved about that
he wants government to work the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
I agree with him on that. I mean, politically, I'm not in the same position as he is, but the man has integrity. He wants the government to work properly. He wants it to be a lot smaller than it is. He's not a fan of big government by any stretch of the imagination, but what is there, he wants it to work properly. And I can't argue with that.
He's not the only one. I mean, I kind of think
his political positions other than that, but on that one, not.
I think there are a few others that are kind of in agreement with him. I mean, obviously they can all see that nobody's allowed to make an amendment, but I think there are a few others, and I don't know which ones they are. I don't know if it's Rand Paul or who it is, but there's There's a few others that I think are kind of in that same camp, that they're like, this is not the way it's supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're upset about it. You know, they're not just like, well, whatever.
I mean, Joe Walsh has had a lot to say about this administration. And Walsh was an absolute far-right Tea Party Republican. And I follow him on Twitter, and watching his sort of conversion on the road to Damascus has been really quite interesting. He will acknowledge that he was part of the problem, that he used to come out with the same kind of rhetoric that Trump does. And he has realized how incredibly divisive that was and how damaging it was to the country. So he's absolutely sworn off doing that. And often I find there's not that much I can argue with him with the stuff that he posts on Twitter. He's absolutely concerned about the corruption. He wants the government to work properly. Again, like Imaj, he doesn't want it to be big government. He's a Tea Party Republican, but nevertheless, he's really had an epiphany, if you like, about nasty politics.
Okay, so this is Joe Walsh.
He primaried Trump.
Former Republican candidate for president, former congressman, author of F Silence, Patriotic American Husband, Father, Brother, Son. And he posted today, the president of the US today accused doctors of lying about the virus. Doctors. He is a danger to this country. No policy victory is worth having him in the White House. And then 51 minutes ago, he ignores Dr. Fauci and retweets Chuck Woolery. 113 days, America. Work hard, then vote.
So he has posted things like, I am a far-right Republican and I will work my ass off to get Joe Biden elected. And he will too. Like, you know, because these right-wingers, they don't just talk, they do. They put their money where their mouth is. So these never-Trumpers are fascinating people. I'm not saying that I have equal regard for every one of them, but there are a lot of them that are really interesting. I mean, I like to listen to Tom Nichols, for instance. He's a far-right Republican, but he's funny, and he often makes a lot of sense. And Rick Wilson, another one, a far-right Republican. I think he put out.
Tom Nichols is this professor, author of The Death of Experience. Okay.
Radio Free Tom is
Gotcha. I got it.
The key to that. Rick Wilson is another never-Trumper, far-right Republican. He's hilarious, for one thing. And he's trying to, I think it might have been a book or it might have been a video that he put out.
Lincoln Project?
He was part of the Lincoln Project, but the tagline I was thinking of was how to save America from Trump and how to save the Democrats from themselves. So these never-Trumpers are trying to teach the Democrats political messaging, which Democrats almost universally suck at. So this is fascinating to me that you've got all these right-wingers who are bringing all their talent for extremely effective advertising to benefit people who should be their opposition. This fascinates me. That you're getting a breakdown of the Republican Party. So it's gone into the Trumpist wing and then the sort of rump of the old Republican Party, if you like. And a lot of these older guys are just fascinating. Some of them are sort of dodgy characters. And I think George Conway is kind of dodgy. He's absolutely a never-Trumper, which is fascinating because his wife works for Donald Trump. So this is Kellyanne Conway's husband is an absolute never-Trumper. So is her daughter. Her daughter, Claudia Conway, who's only 15, is posting progressive stuff all over Twitter all the time. It's really quite interesting to see how the fractures are playing out, how the whole political landscape is shifting because the old parties basically don't have what it takes to deal with the future. I think both of the parties will split. The Republicans will split into a cult of personality evangelical wing and the sort of sensible kind of Republicans that used to exist. And then the Democrats are likely to be a centrist group and a progressive group. Right now, they're all in the same party, but they really shouldn't be. They're not on the same page politically at all. I mean, I think the Democrats are a center-right party, quite frankly. There are a lot of Democrats who are way more conservative than the conservatives in places like Canada and New Zealand, for instance, and Australia, the entire political spectrum in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia would fit in the Democratic Party. So the Overton window has just shifted so far to the right in the States. It's just unreal. And you look at the policies that are absolutely mainstream, like socialized medicine, absolutely mainstream in every other developed country in the world, except America. This is considered a loony left policy in America. Everywhere else, it's just, well, this is normal. This, of course you do that. That's just the way it's done. This is the most efficient, the most cost effective, and the best for people. So that's what you do.
Yeah, you know, something really irritating today when I was working on my taxes was, you know, it showed how much of my pension was going towards my health insurance and thousands of dollars for the premiums.
It's insane.
And we still have to pay.
Copays are huge too.
Right. So we have to pay $800 in copays, but then there's something called co-insurance, which is you have to pay 10% of whatever it is first. And then there's like $1,000. So you got to pay 10% of whatever the bill is first out of your co-insurance amount. And then the rest of it's applied to your co-pay, and that's $800. So what it ends up being is per person. I mean, I have to admit that I have state of Michigan retiree insurance, so it's the worst almost in the world. Well, not the worst in the world, but it's not great. So it's like $18 per person. So that's like almost $8,000, and that's not pharmaceuticals. It's not dental. It's just doctor. So you already paying this portion of the pension for the insurance, but the insurance doesn't even start working until you paid almost, you know, you paid at least $1,000 per person. So it ends up costing like between $8,000 and $10,000. And that's when you have insurance.
Yeah. It's the worst health system in the entire world. It really is. You'd be better off having just straight pay as you go, because if you took the insurance money out of everything, then the prices would come down by a factor of 10. And then people might be able to
you're a citizen of 3 other countries. Can I become a citizen of one of those while I'm living here? Like,
probably not.
Is there something I can do to become a Canadian citizen from here, or a UK citizen, or a New Zealand citizen? I mean, I'm okay with dual citizenship.
You can apply, but you have to have points. They have a point system in Canada.
You have to have visited or something?
Yeah, and you pretty much have to say that you intend to live there.
I've been to Canada like 5 times.
It's awesome.
You know, do you think that would give me enough points?
My ex eventually got enough points. He had to wait about 20 years. He tried to apply when he was young, and they wouldn't have him at the time. He applied later when he was 45 when he applied. And at that point, he had a PhD in engineering and, you know, all sorts of industrial experience.
I don't understand. Did he not get married to you in Canada?
No, I lived in England at the time we got married.
Oh, so
and then we both came back.
So if he had waited, no, that wouldn't have worked either. Yeah, well, if he had waited to get married to you in Canada, would he have been a citizen then?
He would still have had to apply. I mean, you still have to apply, and you
can live there, but you're not a citizen.
Yeah, and if I would have had to promise to sponsor him, but then I would have had to demonstrate earning enough money to be able to do that. And I don't earn a lot of money. Well, I earn virtually none because everything I do is a public service. So would have been no way I could have done that.
Which reminds me, Nicole has PayPal. What was it? NM Foss? Or
no,
was
it's stoneley49@gmail.com is my PayPal.
That's a weird one. Why Stoneley 49?
Well, Stoneley was my nom de plume and I was 49 years old at the time I set up that email account.
Ah, it's like 5 or 6 years ago. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Anything else? So these are a few important things. So Trump is not condoning, but he's commuting the sentence of someone who's guilty, probably. And so that he's not impeached. and he's got this bar guy who's basically trying to get him off of everything, out of everything. But Biden's in the lead, apparently. There's a number of Republicans who are saying never Trump again. And
well, there's another thing that I forgot to mention that happened in the last 2 weeks. It came out that Russia had been paying bounties on American soldiers to the Taliban. And so they were paying a lot of money to the Taliban for every American soldier that was killed.
Like a lot of money as in $100?
Oh, no, way more than that. I can't remember exactly, but it was a substantial sum of money.
Like $1,000.
And more than that, I think. I can't remember. I did see it, but I can't remember exactly. I think it might have been 100,000. It was a lot of money.
What?
They were paying huge bounties for dead American soldiers.
Why?
Trump had been informed about this months ago, has done absolutely nothing.
Why would Russia care?
Well, put the cat among the pigeons a bit, I guess. Make their lives easier because they're in the country as well, and they would rather there were fewer Americans in there.
This was in Afghanistan?
Yes, in Afghanistan.
Hey,
so there's a huge political row about this because Trump has done absolutely nothing about this, despite knowing about it for months. So Tammy Duckworth, she's a colonel, I believe. She had both her legs blown off in Iraq. So she was she was a helicopter pilot, I think. But anyway, she lost both legs in Iraq. She's a senator now, and she's been defending the military. And there's just been this huge row about it because the Trump administration has been basically saying, well, who cares? And she's saying, these are American soldiers. You're sending people over to fight overseas and you don't even care if someone you're supposedly an ally with is paying to have them killed. So this is a huge issue. So Hannity was basically saying that Tammy Duckworth was a useless person, and Tammy Duckworth was coming back and saying Hannity was, didn't defend the military, and so there's been a lot of fuss about that. Trump also signed an executive order saying it's 10 years in prison for anyone who damages Confederate statues and things like that. He thinks he can change the law with executive orders. That's not how it works, but he doesn't know how government works, so this is what he's trying to do. Just all kinds of things he's trying to push through at the moment that are absolutely illegal, unconstitutional. He doesn't care about any of the rules because he's never been subjected to any rules in his entire life. And so we have to see how things go in the States, whether the Constitution still means anything at all, whether the legal system still means anything. We don't know at the moment. The administration is completely lawless, completely disregarding all the rules, no matter where they come from. And it'll be interesting to see if they somehow manage to rig the election and continue in power, whether with Trump or not. They could still be a right-wing dictatorship after November.
This feels almost like a different USA, because the USA I've spent the last 2 weeks in is not the USA you're describing. At least it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, when you see things from the other side of the world, what you're getting is all the sort of really big things that are going on. But when you're living in a place, you don't really see any of that because it's all up here somewhere. It's at the 30,000 foot level, and it doesn't affect most people's ordinary lives most of the time. So most people are just thinking, well, we just ignore government. Government just does its thing, and we live our lives, and we just hope the government doesn't bother us. So if people are used to ignoring government and thinking, well, that just works, we just take it for granted, all of a sudden there's a completely different kind of government that is a pathological kleptocracy and a right-wing dictatorship. And it's moving into power. And this will change the fabric of America completely. But most people don't even realize what's been going on because people aren't paying that level of attention. I pay an obsessive level of attention to American politics, vastly more than most Americans do. And when you do that, all the patterns just leap off the page, especially when you have the historical context to know what's happened in other places that went down that route. So you follow the authoritarian playbook that, say, Hitler or Mussolini or Pol Pot followed, or Stalin, and you look at the kind of ways that people bring in authoritarian rule and get rid of whatever was there before, and it can happen very quickly. Mussolini destroyed Italy in about 3 years. And Trump has pretty much done the same for America. Not destroyed everybody's lives the way they are used to living them yet, but destroying what has given people the ability to live the way they do. So they're basically living on borrowed time, that the country is not going to look the same in a few years' time because of the things that have already happened, because of the changes that have already happened. And it's getting worse. So this is going to be a big problem. And the whole rise of really pathological evangelical religion, death cult type stuff, not ordinary Christianity. Or I have no problem with ordinary Christianity. I have a huge problem with death cult evangelicals because they just have no room for rationality whatsoever. And they've just decided Trump is the second coming and they don't care what he does. He's the Messiah as far as they're concerned. So they will let him do absolutely anything. And they will also punish his enemies for him if he asks them to. So they will turn up on state capitals with their guns and whatever it might be. And I think there are going to be huge upheavals coming in the States, not that far off. Really, over the rest of this year, I think is going to really be quite something. And I don't hope for these things. I predict them, but it's not that I want these things to happen. People come out and say, oh, you just want all this to happen. You just want to burn it all down. No, I absolutely don't. I would very much like for people to stop engaging in the kind of pathological, extractive ways of living that they currently are, but I wouldn't burn the system down to achieve that because burning the system down just hurts everybody and hurts the vulnerable more than anybody else. So I don't take the attitude that, say, Deep Green Resistance would take, Derek Jensen and this group, which is just burn it all down and start again. I think that would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and you don't want to do that. But at the same time, we have to see where things are going and what sort of obstacles are coming up, because if we don't see them, there's no way to avoid them. And I think there are going to be a lot of obstacles to ordinary life in the US.
So as we end, we should end with a reminder to thumbs up if you appreciate that Nicole and I shared this conversation for free to the internet for you to watch, because we didn't have to. I mean, we could have just done this chat, the two of us, I suppose. And feel free to comment and like and share. And let's do 5 things people can do to be proactive.
Absolutely.
Number 1, get to know your neighbors.
Yes, that is thing number 1. Get to know your neighbors.
And be friends with them. Make friends.
Build relationships of trust with the people you are surrounded by, because if you're going to be stuck
actual
there,
physical neighbors, like the
yes.
people who, like, you can throw rocks and hit them when they're outside.
Yes.
But don't do that.
Yeah, so if you can, try and pool resources with them to some extent. I don't mean necessarily sharing all your pool of money. You don't have to start with something like that. Look after each other's kids every now and then, and things like that. Swap childcare when somebody has an appointment, whatever
Share
it might
stuff.
be. Yeah, share stuff. Do you have a cup of sugar, or can I borrow your lawnmower? Stuff like that. These are the kind of things that bring people together. And you can go further than that and say, let's have a movie night and have it hosted at different houses or something. Just
with masks.
Brings people together. Yeah, and talk to people about things like masks and how they see the risk of the virus, because ideally you want people to be on the same page with these non-pharmaceutical interventions. You want people to understand why they're important and why they need to do things like this. And if everyone's on the same page and everyone is protecting everyone else, great, none of you will get sick.
So number 1 is get to know your neighbors better.
Yeah, I mean, definitely getting out of debt, if you possibly can, is really, really important. Trying to have some control over the essentials. Reduce your living costs.
So number 2 is get out of debt.
Yeah. So then reduce your living costs so if you can live on half of what you earn, then you're heading in the right direction because you've got a cushion. If you are maxed out, living paycheck to paycheck, you're not going to be in a sustainable position. Some people have no choice. Other people do. Some people are living paycheck to paycheck with a massive mortgage. Sell that house and rent something and then you won't be in that position anymore. You'll got rid of the debt. And if you had any equity in the home, then you've got some cash on hand. That's an important thing too. So things like that are really, really important.
And if you're renting, don't rent the $2,000 a month place, rent the $1,000 a month place.
Yeah, rent something, the smallest thing that will serve your needs would be ideal. Yeah. Things like having control over the essentials of your own existence, if you possibly can, that would help. Maybe also setting up, if you can anyway, set up a business and think about local supply chains and local distribution networks, because there's so many businesses that are very geographically far flung. So the components of whatever it is they sell come from all over the world. The products they produce go all over the world. Things like that, they're going to find that they can't get their inputs and they have no market for their outputs. But if you can set up businesses with local supply chains and local distribution networks, then you can be something that glues your community together, that helps to hold people together, providing essential goods or services. And that sort of thing is really, really useful. So there are so many things that people can do. A lot of it has to do with working with other people, finding ways to connect. Try an extended family again. So think about consolidating a family in one property. So you have two sets of grandparents, you have the nuclear family, maybe you even have some aunts and uncles and cousins and things. If all of you together can afford a homestead, then all of you are going to be looking after each other, potentially in a place that has no debt, because if you pool that many people together, chances are you've got enough to buy something outright. Then you just have to learn to live together, but you're helping each other. So the younger people can help with the older people who no longer have any health insurance and things. And the older people, if they manage to get their resources out of the system in time, then they can pay off the debts of the younger people so that the younger people aren't struggling under student debt from day one. Things like that. So consolidating assets within families makes a huge amount of sense. Often the older people have all the assets and the younger people have all the debt. But the older people are going to find that they're high and dry when they lose their pension and their health care. So they're going to need someone to look after them. And the younger people who are in debt need to get started on the property ladder. They want to have families. The assets that their parents' generation has can allow them all to do that together. These things are really important. And we like to think that we can be totally independent. This hyper-individualism that all the Anglo world has moved towards is about breaking everything down to the smallest levels and saying we can just be one person on our own. A man is an island, but they're not. They're really not. And when the support systems break down, the support systems that allowed us to think we could be an island, when those break down and we realize we can't, we better not still be trying to be one, or it's not going to work. So people need to come together before they absolutely are forced to. If you're forced to come together, you're not going to enjoy it. If you do it as a choice, you do it in advance when nobody's panicking and you have plenty of time to think about what all of you actually want, and you can talk about that and work on achieving it, then you can do it. But if you wait too long and then it's just, well, all of us are about to be repossessed, so what are we going to do? You're probably going to be in a state of mind that is not conducive to cooperative thinking at that point. So you have to do these things in advance. You have to prepare in advance if you possibly can, because it will put you in so much better position in the long run.
I think that's a good place to end for today.
Okay, you're tired, I can tell. It's very late for you. It's the middle of the day for me. So.
Yeah, I don't know what time it is. 9:35, I think. I have my time on UTC, so it says 1:35, and I'll type time and see what it is here.
-5, usually.
Yeah, it's 9:35. So, okay, so you're thinking next week, which would be.
I did see a message from Stephanie came through. She is definitely interested, so I can try and set it up for next week.
Okay,
if that
yeah.
would work for you.
So that would be June 21st.
She's in Wisconsin. Is that one other time zone over?
That's
it is, isn't it?
Yeah, they're 1 hour. They're at 8:35 right now, so it's 9:35 here. They're 8:35.
Okay, so the same time would probably.
They would start at 5 p.m.
So it would probably work for her to do this kind of time slot, I would think. I'll suggest it anyway. If it doesn't work, I don't know if she has kids, or I don't really know anything about her life, so I'm not sure. what her time schedule is, but I'll try and set something up.
Sure, and you're welcome to CC me if you want. You don't have
Oh,
to.
I absolutely will.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for Nicole, first of all, for being with us again. And if you have not seen any of the other videos of Nicole, Nicole has many, many videos, some that are just her lecturing, and some are the two of us talking, and you've talked with other people as well. And the Local Future YouTube channel, go ahead and check it out. And thank you everybody for viewing, all the 6 or 7 people who stuck with us this entire time. If you have not done thumbs up or everything, please do that. Any final words before we say goodbye, Nicole?
Well, I just wish people the best of luck. I mean, things are really challenging at the moment, and it's going to be tough for quite a long time, but we will get through this.
Yes, we will. All right. Thank you so much for all your time, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.